Chapter 70. Most importantly, in the distant past, when the age of Dharma arrived, the once sacred land of Taoism, Mount Longhu, was unable to rise again. It was not just Mount Longhu, other places of cultivation were the same. These cultivators hid themselves from the world, hoping to find another way to cultivate. It had to be said that man was the leader of all living things, and his wisdom was as vast as the sea. In the age of Dharma, a cultivation prodigy appeared in Mount Longhu. He cultivated both Taoism and martial arts, and even learned from ancient martial arts, allowing him to walk on a strange path of cultivation. The blood-qi transfer technique. The human body was a miniature universe with countless mysteries. This cultivation prodigy combined ancient martial arts and cultivation. He kept digging out his own blood and qi, using his own blood and qi as a medium. Finally, he was able to perform some simple spells. This should have been a joyous occasion, and could have allowed cultivators to reappear in the world. However, after 10 years, not only was this cultivation prodigy unable to break through the 9th layer of qi refining to become a cultivator, but he was buried in the earth instead. After the verification of the later generations, they helplessly discovered a fact. Although this cultivation genius could use some simple techniques, every time he used a bit of his blood qi, his lifespan would decrease by a bit. This was not a cultivation method at all, but a method to take one's life. Even so, the blood and qi conveyance technique left behind by this prodigy was regarded as a treasure by the Taoists. After all, in the age of Dharma decline, it was already very impressive to be able to cast spells. There was no hope for immortality, no path of cultivation, but having techniques was better than being immortal. The spectral elder looked to be in his 70s or 80s, but he was only in his early 30s. It was only because he constantly used ghost techniques that his blood qi gradually depleted, making him look like an old man in his twilight years. When Yi Xian thought of this, he suddenly discovered an extremely terrifying secret. Up until now, he had been constantly devouring blood qi to reach his current level of cultivation, so he did not need much spiritual qi. Wasn't the blood and qi transportation method created by this Taoist prodigy similar to his cultivation method of devouring blood and qi through different means? The only difference between the two was that Yi Xian had devoured blood qi to increase his cultivation, so his own blood qi was extremely terrifying. On the other hand, this Taoist genius had been constantly consuming his own blood qi, which was why he had lost his life. This was also the fundamental difference between the two. Yi Xian suddenly had a horrifying thought. The blood-soul mutant beasts lurked in the human world, constantly devouring flesh and blood essence to gradually restore their cultivation. Humans would eventually become their prey, and the world would definitely be in chaos in the future. If these Taoist cultivators were to obtain the blood qi devouring technique from these blood souls and combine it with the blood qi transferring technique created by this Taoist genius, wouldn't they be able to recreate the world of immortal cultivators? When this thought appeared in his mind, Yi Xian was in a trance. It was as if he saw a whole new world unfold before him. However, after thinking about it for a while, he smiled. Even if these cultivators obtained the method to devour blood and qi, they didn't have any cultivation methods to cultivate at all. At most, they could only break through the 9th stage of qi refining and enter the foundation establishment stage. Although their lifespan could be as high as 300 years, they would still die in the end. Unless if Yi Xian passed down the immortal cultivation method to this world, then there would be a real immortal cultivator like him in this world. However, an extremely cruel scene also appeared in Yi Xian's mind. In the future world, there would be slaughter everywhere. Everyone would hunt others for their own cultivation. This world would be broken and completely turned into a hell. As a great cultivator at the tribulation passing stage, Yi Xian was only one step away from becoming an immortal. He was deeply aware of how rugged the path of immortal cultivation was. Talent, temperament, perseverance, and opportunity were all indispensable. Qi refining, foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, astral projection, spirit severing, fusion, tribulation passing, and immortal ascension. There were a total of 9 realms. Each realm was like a natural chasm. One wrong step would lead to the destruction of one's soul. Not to mention that people in this world could devour blood and qi to begin immortal cultivation, even in the earth immortal world where spiritual qi filled the sky, wanting to become an immortal was 1 in a billion. Yi Xian wasn't worried about the appearance of immortal cultivators like him in this world. As long as they were his enemies, he could destroy them with his palm. Even if a true immortal descended, he still had his own trump card to deal with it. However, if this secret was revealed to the world and the world developed in this direction, the peaceful days he wanted would be gone. After hearing what he heard today, Yi Xian's mood was extremely complicated. He was sure that this path would work. He could also let Mother Yi and his younger sister step into the ranks of immortal cultivation. However, this way, disputes would arise everywhere in the world. Even his family would have to step into this quagmire and begin to fight against the heavens. Immortal cultivators cultivated their fate and went against the heavens. The master was only a guide who gave you the correct guidance on cultivation. The future path was to be walked by yourself. Yi Xian understood that if his family became immortal cultivators, he couldn't protect them forever. He also had his own path to walk, and this path was more difficult than other immortal cultivators. Dispelling his troubled thoughts, he temporarily put this matter aside in Yi Xian's heart. However, Yi Xian also understood that the blood-soul beasts were lurking in the human world. When they gradually appeared in the eyes of the world would change sooner or later. Master! A voice entered Yi Xian's ears and pulled him back from his thoughts. I don't like the title, Master. You should just call me Mr. Yi, said Yi Xian calmly. Yes, Mr. Yi. Zhuo Junting's body was covered in blood, and a vicious aura was growing around her. Her attitude was very humble, and her eyes were filled with the color of death. It was as if there was nothing in the world that made her reluctant to part with it. Looking at the woman in front of him, Yi Xian helplessly shook his head. She used to be a rich young lady who could have lived a peaceful life as a mortal, but in the end, because of hatred, she walked on a path of no return. Yi Xian admitted that he wasn't a kind person. He even used some tricks to turn Zhuo Junting into what she was now. However, Yi Xian still believed that there was no such thing as love for no reason in this world, much less hatred for no reason. He didn't owe her anything, and only by paying her would he be able to bestow her with power that surpassed mortals. The former Zhuo Junting is already dead. Now that you've become a blood soul, you're most sensitive to blood qi. You should use the Zhuo clan as a foundation to develop your own forces. Help me find the blood souls and blood soul beasts lurking around the world, said Yi Xian softly. Yes, Master. Zhuo Junting bowed. There was no sign of disobedience in her eyes. Everything was done. Yi Xian took a deep look at Zhuo Junting. When he took a step out, he disappeared from the Zhuo clan's villa. Chapter 71. The sun rose from the east and sunlight shone down from the sky. Yi Xian faced the sun and breathed in and out. His mouth and nose occasionally inhaled and exhaled boundless blood energy. His clothes fluttered without any wind, and ripples bloomed in the air. Ding-ling-ling. The sound of a phone ringing caused Yi Xian to slowly open his eyes and wake up from his cultivation. He casually picked up the phone and Azure Dragon's laughter came from the other end. Mr. Yi, I didn't disturb your rest, did I? As the saying goes, one does not visit a temple for no reason. Yi Xian understood in his heart that the Azure Dragon had called early in the morning was obviously not to greet him. What is it? Yi Xian said in a serious voice. Yi Xian's attitude was very direct, causing the Azure Dragon to smile obsequiously on the phone and directly start talking about serious matters. After a full 10 minutes, Yi Xian slowly nodded and said, All right, I understand. Mr. Yi, I'll send someone to pick you up tomorrow. After receiving a reply from Yi Xian, the Azure Dragon's voice was very excited, and then he hung up the phone. The matter was very simple. The Martial Security Department was going to hold an annual meeting, and the Azure Dragon's call to Yi Xian was to invite Yi Xian. As a guest elder of the Earth Group, Yi Xian naturally would not reject the Azure Dragon's request. After all, the Azure Dragon had helped him a lot with the things he had done. As for the so-called annual meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. The rankings of the 8 groups were also divided according to the annual martial arts competition. The higher the ranking, the more resources they would receive. However, what Yi Xian did not know was that in the past 10 years, the Earth Group could not be said to be at the bottom, but it was not far off. In last year's martial arts competition, they were ranked second to last. As the leader of the Earth Group, how could the Azure Dragon feel good? However, the Azure Dragon was extremely excited about this year's martial arts competition. As long as Yi Xian was willing to participate in this year's annual meeting, the other 7 groups would definitely have a whole new level of respect for them. Yi Xian was a guest delegate of the Earth Group, so he naturally would not compete with the members of the other groups. However, the 8 groups of guest delegates would have a simple spar. Although it looked like they were making friends through martial arts, it was actually to show off the strength of the guest delegates of each group. After all, the 8 groups of guest elders only listened to orders and did not listen to orders. They also had great authority. This could be considered a different kind of selection. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know about this, and Azure Dragon didn't tell him either. The Azure Dragon would not tell Yi Xian that every year in the martial arts competition, the Earth Group would always be at the bottom. If you did not come this year, the Earth Group would definitely lose all their face. Azure Dragon would never say such embarrassing words even if he was beaten to death. All he could do was to invite Yi Xian to the headquarters of the Wu-En department in a roundabout way and explain the matter in a subtle way. At this moment, Yi Xian hung up the phone as an idea popped up in his mind. Azure Dragon and the others all knew that he was in Jiangnan City, and yesterday, Zhuo Junting had personally come to look for him. However, he lived with his family, and sooner or later, his family would find out. This also gave Yi Xian the idea of going out to live alone, which would also avoid some unnecessary trouble. As for the safety of his family, Yi Xian was not worried at all. After all, he had refined 2 jade sword pendants and a great formation to protect them. Even a pre-celestial stage martial artist would not be able to endanger their safety. With a decision in his heart, Yi Xian picked up the phone again and called Zhuo Junting, instructing her to help him find a house. Zhuo Junting was very efficient. In less than an hour, someone came to the Yi Xian's house and handed a bunch of keys to the door to the Yi Xian. When Mrs. Yi and the others saw this scene, although they were reluctant to let Yi Xian go out to live alone, Mrs. Yi also understood that her son was very mysterious, and there were some things that he did not want her to know. Hence, Mrs. Yi did not ask the reason why Yi Xian was living alone. Yi Xian could also see the reluctance in Mrs. Ye's eyes. He said that he would go to Capital City for a period of time and that he would accompany her when he returned to Jiangnan. The next day, when a helicopter flew over from the sky and landed directly on the lawn of the Yi family home, Yi Xian boarded the helicopter and flew directly in the direction of Capital City under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Yi and the others. Watching the helicopter gradually disappear into the distance, a complicated look appeared in his eyes, but he still took out his mobile phone and secretly sent a message. Some people also found out that Yi Xian had gone to Capital City again. The sky was blue and clear for thousands of miles. Tai Li piloted the helicopter and rushed towards Capital City. The little girl's face was pale and her eyes were full of nervousness. From time to time, she would size up Yi Xian from the corner of her eyes. "What are you looking at?" All of a sudden, Yi Xian opened his eyes and looked at Ling Long. "Ah!" Ling Long exclaimed and her face turned red. She immediately lowered her head and looked even more nervous. Looking at the little girl's blushing face beside him, Yi Xian smiled and asked, "Are you very afraid of me?" "No. No. Why would I be afraid of you?" Ling Long's voice trembled slightly, but her tone had already betrayed her inner thoughts. Clearly, the little girl still remembered how Yi Xian almost killed her with his own hands back then. You're a very cute little girl. Unfortunately, you'll never grow up, Yi Xian sighed and stroked Ling Long's hair gently, not caring about whether she was willing or not. Buzz. After Yi Xian said that, Tai Li, who was piloting the helicopter, suddenly shook his hands. The flight that was originally stable suddenly became bumpy. Clearly, Tai Li was greatly affected. Fly steadily, Yi Xian said with a slight frown. Okay, okay, Tai Li said with a flushed face. At this moment, Ling Long's eyes were dull. She could completely feel the warmth of Yi Xian's palm and knew that Yi Xian's action was too intimate. If it were any other time, she would have pushed away Yi Xian's palm and given Yi Xian a cold look. However, Ling Long did not do so. It was not because she was afraid of Yi Xian, but because of Yi Xian's words. Will I really never grow up? Ling Long murmured to herself, her face full of bitterness. Your primordial spirit was born strong, causing the physical body and primordial spirit to be uncoordinated. This hinders the growth of the physical body. Yi Xian saw the crux of Ling Long's problem at a glance and said bluntly. Primordial spirit? What's a primordial spirit? Ling Long seemed to have forgotten how terrifying Yi Xian was. When it came to her own matters, she quickly asked. That's right. How would you know what a primordial spirit is? Yi Xian laughed at himself and continued, you might not understand primordial spirit, but it's actually the so-called spiritual force. You can also call it the soul. The physical body is like a raft in the water. The soul is the thing that controls the raft. Neither of these two can be missing. They are also the foundation of all living things. At this point, Yi Xian looked at Ling Long with a strange look in his eyes. He continued, and you were born with a strong soul. Your body can't bear your soul. This is also the reason why you can't grow up. Mr. Yi. Since you can see Ling Long's problem, then do you have a solution? Tai Li's voice trembled, proving that he was extremely emotional. Chapter 72. Away. Yi Xian shook his head slowly and chuckled. This little girl's soul is getting stronger by the day. Her body will collapse sooner or later. In less than a year, I'm afraid her body will explode and she will die. Grandpa Poison said the same thing. Looks like I won't live past 18. Exquisite smiled sadly. There was a hint of bitterness in her eyes. So it turned out that Ling Long wasn't a little girl. When Yi Xian first saw Ling Long, he'd already noticed it. Mr. Yi. Tai Li begs you. Since you can see the crux of Exquisite's illness, why you must have a way to save her. Tai Li quickly pressed the autopilot button and left the cockpit. He knelt in front of Yi Xian. His eyes were filled with desperation. I do have a way to save her, but why should I help her? What price can you pay? Yi Xian said calmly. Exquisite and Tai Li were overjoyed when they heard the first half of Yi Xian's words. However, when Yi Xian finished his second half, they were stunned. They did not know how to answer Yi Xian. Mr. Yi, as long as you can save Exquisite, my life will be yours from now on, Tai Li said with a flushed face. You're so rough and your cultivation is weak. Other than brute force, what use do I have for you? Yi Xian smiled. Tai Li's face turned red as he looked at Yi Xian's smiling face. Anger rose in his heart. If it were not for the fact that he was no match for Yi Xian, he would have punched Yi Xian in the face. He would have let Yi Xian know why flowers were so red. Mr. Yi, if you have any conditions, just tell me. Although Exquisite's body could not grow up, she was not really a little girl. Her intelligence was much higher than Tai Li's. Since Yi Xian proposed this, he must have his reasons. You're very smart, Yi Xian praised with a smile. It's actually very simple. I can cure your illness, but in exchange, You have to work for me for 10 years. During these 10 years, no matter what I want you to do, you can't disobey. Yi Xian's smile disappeared as he looked at Exquisite with a serious expression. When Yi Xian proposed this condition, Tai Li's expression changed greatly before Ling Long could reply. He immediately refuted, "That's impossible. Your nature is cruel and murderous. If you let Ling Long stay by your side for 10 years, wouldn't she also become a murderous maniac?" Yi Xian narrowed his eyes as a cold light flashed through them. An extremely terrifying murderous aura pressed down on Tai Li like a mountain, causing him to wake up. Only then did he realize that he had said something he shouldn't have. However, the words had already left his mouth, and Tai Li had no way to take them back. He could only continue to say, "If you want to kill me, then kill me. If I frown, then I'm not a good man." Ha! Looking at Tai Li's unyielding expression, Yi Xian's lips curled into a cold smile. He said, "You really think I don't dare to kill you?" A misty bloody light bloomed slightly, and the temperature in the cockpit suddenly dropped. It was as if something extremely terrifying was going to happen in the next moment. "Mr. Yi, I agree." Suddenly, before Yi Xian could make a move, Ling Long's voice rang out. "Ling Long, are you crazy? He's a murderous maniac. Why are you so stupid?" Tai Li shouted anxiously. Looking at Tai Li's agitated expression, Ling Long smiled bitterly and said, "Can't you see? Regardless of whether I agree or not, Mr. Yi won't let me go. Moreover, if he kills you, how can I bear it?" Ha! Yi Xian laughed out loud. He looked at Ling Long with even more admiration, and the murderous intent around him disappeared. In fact, everything Yi Xian did was to force Ling Long to agree. After all, Yi Xian admitted that he was not a saint. It could be said that he was a person who would not do anything without benefits. If he could not get any benefits, why would he bring up the hidden dangers in Ling Long's body? Since the matter was settled, the murderous intent toward Tai Li naturally disappeared. In fact, Yi Xian was just putting on an act. His real goal was still the little girl. "Ling Long, you're very smart. This also proves that I didn't misjudge you. When we get to the Wu and department, I have my ways." All of a sudden. Before Yi Xian could finish, his voice suddenly stopped. When he opened and closed his eyes, an extremely terrifying bloody light flashed across his eyes. He even looked into the distant sky through the window. "Tai Li, find a place to land immediately." Yi Xian's sinister voice made Ling Long and Tai Li feel a chill in their hearts. They had no idea what had happened to Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, what are you up to now?" Tai Li said angrily. "Up to now? Don't you have a radar on the helicopter, you idiot?" Yi Xian's voice was low. His eyes were overflowing with murderous intent. He had already guessed something that he did not want to accept. "Big brother Tai, quickly do as Mr. Yi said and land the helicopter in a safe area." Ling Long followed Yi Xian's gaze and looked into the distant sky. Her little face instantly turned pale. Her spiritual power was strong to begin with, so she naturally saw an extremely terrifying scene. "It's too late." Yi Xian stood up from his seat. The bloody light around his body slowly bloomed. The bloodthirsty demon sword quietly appeared in his hand, and the cabin door was kicked open by him. Viroom. In the distant sky, a missile with a terrifying trail of fire trailing behind it was making a terrifying roar. It surged toward the helicopter Yi Xian was in. Damn it! How is this possible? When this scene appeared before Tai Li's eyes, his face immediately turned pale. His body was trembling, and he kept growling. This is the H-3 satellite positioning missile. Although it's not very powerful, it's more than enough to blow up the helicopter we're in. Ling Long calmly analyzed, but there was a trace of trembling in her voice. There was also a hint of despair mixed in it. "Parachutes, quickly get the parachutes." Tai Li said anxiously, but his heart was also filled with despair. It was too fast, too fast. Ty Lee knew that even if he took out the parachutes now, the missile would blow them into ashes before they could leave the helicopter. In just a short 5 seconds, the missile tore through the sky. The sound of it piercing through the air was ear-splitting. Ty Lee and Ling Long closed their eyes in despair and could only wait for death to come. Boom! The missile finally came, but Ling Long and Ty Lee did not see it. Yi Xian's face was cold. When he slashed out with his sword, a monstrous sword light burst out and instantly cut the missile in half. Then, a violent explosion occurred. However, the aftershock of the explosion instantly knocked Ling Long and Ty Lee unconscious. The helicopter they were in also began to fall to the ground because of the aftershock of the explosion. Viroom! The bloody light soared and crossed the sky. The void was extremely turbulent and rippled. Yi Xian's face was extremely gloomy. When he waved his hand, he directly froze Ling Long and Ty Lee in the air. Under the bloody light, the three of them also descended to the ground. Chapter 73. Huh? Where am I? Are we dead? In the middle of a desolate field, Ling Long groggily opened her eyes and murmured. The glaring sunlight stung her eyes until she saw the unconscious Ty Lee beside her. Only then did she wake up. I'm not dead. Ling Long exclaimed in surprise. Your life is mine. How can you die without my permission? Yi Xian said with his hands behind his back. Mr. Yi. Did you save me? When she saw Yi Xian, Ling Long had the urge to cry. Her eyes were filled with a large amount of mist. She finally confirmed that she wasn't dead and was still alive. Take back your tears and wake this idiot up. We'll head to the capital right now. Yi Xian frowned as he reprimanded in a slightly reprimanding voice. Brother Tai, wake up. Ling Long hurriedly wiped away the tears in her eyes and shook Tai Lee's body. At this moment, Yi Xian was alone in the field. A breeze blew, causing his hair to flutter. He looked at the wreckage of the helicopter in the distance with a gloomy look in his eyes. He had just left Jiangnan City. Apart from Qing Long, only his family knew about it. Qing Long could not have leaked the news. Moreover, Mrs. Yi and his sister did not have much contact with the outside world. Besides, he left in a hurry. Even if someone wanted to find out about him, it would definitely not be so fast. Yi Ping. Yi Xian said in a low voice. He did not have to think to guess that the only person who leaked the news was this underling who had just returned home. Yi Ping had a close relationship with the Yi family. Besides, only the 8 major families in capital city had the power to send missiles to kill him in Xia Nation. However, there was one thing that Yi Xian could not figure out. If this was really done by the Yi family, weren't they a little too stupid? Several big shots of Xia Nation knew that Yi Xian had a huge feud with the Yi family. If he was really killed by the missiles, the Yi family would be the first suspect. Even if the Yi family was one of the 8 great aristocratic families in the capital, this kind of thing had already crossed the bottom line of the Xia kingdom. The Xia kingdom, this colossus, would be even more furious. They would definitely destroy the Yi family and would not show any mercy. Yi Xian thought about it for a long time, but he still couldn't figure out the crux of the matter. However, there was one thing that Yi Xian was very clear about, and that was that Yi Ping must have been the one who betrayed him. Little brother, you really want to force me to kill you? Yi Xian slowly breathed in, the blood in his eyes flashing. Yi. Mr. Yi. Tai Li's face was filled with excitement. The two of them were walking towards Yi Xian, which woke Yi Xian up from his thoughts. I've already informed Lord Azure Dragon. Someone is already coming to receive us. Ling Long came to Yi Xian's side and quickly said. Yi. Mr. Yi. Thank you. Tai Li was at a loss. Although he didn't know how Yi Xian saved him and Ling Long, the fact that the two of them could survive was definitely because of Yi Xian. The Marshal Security Department was indeed very efficient. In less than half an hour, several military jeeps had already found Yi Xian. A few officers even alighted from the jeeps and saluted Yi Xian to show their identities. After getting into the jeep, Yi Xian and the others drove in the direction of capital city. A large number of soldiers were left behind to guard the scene behind the wreckage of the helicopter. In the car, Yi Xian seemed to be resting with his eyes closed, but the murderous aura around him inadvertently made Ling Long and Tai Li feel like they were sitting on pins and needles. Ling Long, tell Azure Dragon not to make this matter public for the time being, lest we alert him. I'll make a decision when I reach capital city. Yi Xian opened his eyes and said in a calmer voice. Huh. Okay. Ling Long hurriedly agreed, then dialed Azure Dragon's number and passed on Yi Xian's instructions. Mr. Yi, Lord Azure Dragon wants to talk to you, Ling Long said. No need. I'll talk to him in detail when I reach capital city. Yi Xian closed his eyes again. He had no intention of talking to Azure Dragon. At the same time, capital city, Marshal Security Department's Earth Group office. The table in front of Azure Dragon was smashed into pieces. His expression was extremely ugly. He paced back and forth in the room, his body occasionally emitting an extremely cold aura. How dare you use an H-2 satellite missile? No matter who you are, Lao Tzu will definitely make you pay a painful price. Azure Dragon roared in a low voice. He was already extremely furious. After more than 10 minutes, Azure Dragon picked up the phone again and directly called the Grand Marshal of China, Li Lingguo. Obviously, this matter had already risen to the national level and was definitely not Yi Xian's personal matter. Elderly, yes, that's the situation. All right, I understand. An hour later, Azure Dragon hung up the phone and his expression became slightly better. However, he also understood that a huge earthquake was about to happen in China, because he could tell from Li Lingguo's voice how angry the other party was. Capital City. The military jeep was driving on the road, heading in the direction of the Earth Group office. This was the scene that Yi Xian saw when he got off the car. Mr. Yi, I've frightened you. Azure Dragon, dressed in a military uniform, strode towards Yi Xian. The members of the Earth Group followed closely behind him, greeting Yi Xian one after another. Looking at Azure Dragon's guilty face, Yi Xian patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "It's just a small matter. There's no need to mobilize so many people. Let's go in and talk." Azure Dragon had thought that Yi Xian would be in a bad mood after encountering this matter, and might even denounce him. However, there was a huge discrepancy between his imagination and reality. Yi Xian did not show any signs of anger, which made Azure Dragon feel even more ashamed. In the Earth Group's meeting room, Azure Dragon sat at the head of the table, Yi Xian sat to the side, Tai Li and Ling Long stood to the side, and the rest of the members of the Earth Group had been dispersed by Azure Dragon long ago. Mr. Yi, don't worry. I will definitely give you an explanation for this matter. Azure Dragon said sincerely. Are there any clues? Yi Xian was sure that on his way to the capital, Azure Dragon had already sent people to investigate this matter. H-2 Satellite Positioning Missile. Although this weapon is not very powerful and is only a probing missile, this kind of thing is definitely not available to private individuals. This is also a taboo in China. Azure Dragon slowly explained, his face slightly gloomy as he continued, after our investigations, there is not a single H-2 missile missing from the arsenals all over the country. You mean to say that this missile is privately owned? Yi Xian said with an unfathomable gaze. Mr. Ye's words make sense, but the possibility is not high. In terms of national defense and security, China is second to none in the world, and will never allow private individuals to possess such a restricted weapon. Azure Dragon said with certainty. Just because it's not allowed doesn't mean it's not allowed. You don't have to worry about this matter. I will naturally find out who did it. Yi Xian tapped his fingers on Zhuo Yan's face, his voice becoming calmer and calmer. Chapter 74. Yi Xian told Azure Dragon a few things. The first thing was that the news of his arrival in the capital could be released directly and let the person who wanted to kill him know. Perhaps there would be some unexpected gains. The second thing was that Yi Xian asked Azure Dragon to find a residence for him. He was going to stay in the capital for a long time, so Azure Dragon nodded and agreed. As for the third thing, it was to ask for people. From then on, Ling Long would no longer be a member of the Earth team and would always be by his side. Azure Dragon agreed immediately. However, there was a small incident in the middle, and that was when Tai Li shamelessly begged Yi Xian to let him follow Ling Long. Yi Xian thought about it and agreed. Mr. Yi, the leaders will definitely want to see you when you come to the capital this time. Without waiting for Azure Dragon to finish, Yi Xian waved his hand and interrupted, there's no need to see them for the time being. When I find out who wants to kill me, I'll meet the leaders. Alright, then I'll reply to the leaders. A bitter smile appeared on Azure Dragon's face. Only this Mr. Yi in front of him could be so casual. If it were anyone else, they would have already climbed up the social ladder. Everything was over. Azure Dragon ordered the members of the Earth team to lead Yi Xian and the others to their residence. The news of Yi Xian's arrival in the capital was also spread by Azure Dragon according to Yi Xian's instructions. The Nangong family of the capital's 8 great families. Yi Canghai and his son sat in the inner hall. Their expressions were extremely ugly, and their eyes were filled with hatred as they looked at the Nangong family head. Bang! Yi Canghai slammed the table and stood up. He roared angrily, Nangong Tian, are you trying to kill my Yi family? Brother Canghai, what are you talking about? Why don't I understand? Nangong Tian's hair was silver white, but he had a domineering aura. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, but his expression did not change at all. Nangong Tian, stop pretending. I was the one who told you the news of Yi Xian's arrival in the capital. I've really underestimated you. You actually have H2 missiles. Even if you want the Nangong family to be destroyed, don't implicate the Yi family. Yi Canghai roared, but there was a trace of fear in his eyes. Even though the 8 great families in the capital city had an important position in the military, politics, and business, military, and politics, weapons had crossed the bottom line of Xia Nation. If the big shots of Xia country found out about this, they definitely wouldn't let it go. It was no wonder that Yi Canghai was so furious. His original intention was to ease the relationship between him and Yi Xian so that the Yi family could develop steadily. If Yi Xian could return to the Yi family, it would be the best thing. That was also the reason why he wanted Yi Ping to return to the Yi family. However, Yi Canghai was now very regretful. He initially thought that Nangong Tian would have the same thoughts as him after knowing that Yi Xian had the support of the big shots of Xia Nation. However, he did not expect Nangong Tian to go crazy and do such an irreversible thing because Nangong Yun died in Yi Xian's hands. What made Yi Canghai the most uneasy was that the Nangong family actually had H2 missiles. Was Nangong Tian crazy? What was the Nangong family trying to do? Now, Yi Canghai did not want to guess why the Nangong family had such a thing. He was facing the pressure of the big shots of Xia Nation. This was because everyone knew that Yi Xian had an enormous grudge with the Yi family. With such a thing happening, the Yi family would be the first to bear the brunt of the suspicion. Wouldn't they become the scapegoat of the Nangong family? Brother Canghai, I don't understand what you're talking about. What H2 missiles? Don't frame the Nangong family. Nangong Tian was as calm as a mountain and the corners of his lips curled into a smug smile. Humph. Looking at Nangong Tian's smug expression, Yi Canghai laughed out of anger and said, Fine, fine, fine. Since you want to drag the Yi family down with you, I might as well tell you that Yi Xian is not dead. He has already arrived in capital city. If he finds out that the Nangong family is behind this, you should know better than anyone what will happen to the Nangong family. Hao, let's go. Yi Canghai called out to Yi Canghao and turned to walk out of the door. However, before Yi Canghai could walk out of the door, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at Nangong Tian. He sneered, Nangong Tian, although the Yi family is in a precarious situation and the great Xia nation is about to collapse, you should know that the blood of the Yi family flows in Yi Xian's body. Even if he hates us, the Yi family is not at the stage where we will be wiped out. You're on your own now. Yi Canghai's words were powerful and powerful. The father and son then left the Nangong family. Crack. The exquisite teacup was crushed into pieces. Nangong Tian's expression was extremely gloomy. He never thought that Yi Xian would still be alive under the bombardment of the H-2 missile and even arrive at the capital. Yi Canghai, you old man. Since you don't want to avenge Yun, and only want to mend your relationship with that bastard, don't blame me for being ruthless and causing your Yi family to be doomed eternally, Nangong Tian said eerily. Someone, go and reply to Mr. Enta. Tell him that I agree to his request. Nangong Tian's voice was crazy as he ordered. He also asked the servant to hurry out to convey Nangong Tian's message. At this moment, although Nangong Tian had gone crazy and started to ignore everything, he knew the severity of the situation. Facing Yi Xian, a Khanate stage martial artist, the Nangong family would be wiped out in an instant. No, it seems like I really have to use the heaven summoning order. However, is that person really still alive in this world? Nangong Tian mumbled to himself. He did not sound confident. However, at this point, the Nangong family would be exposed to Yi Xian sooner or later. If Yi Xian came, the Nangong family would not even have a chance to fight back. Nangong Tian understood that the first to strike would gain the upper hand. He stood up and walked towards the ancestral hall without hesitation. There was an ancient wooden token with the words Heaven Summoning Order engraved on it. When Nangong Tian held the token in his hand, his expression changed drastically. He felt a sharp pain in his palm and almost dropped the wooden token on the ground. Li Huantian, the 9th most powerful person in the world 100 years ago. Is he really still alive? Nangong Tian mumbled to himself with a strange look in his eyes. The Heaven Summoning Order had a long history. 100 years ago, Nangong Tian's grandfather had saved an extraordinary person who was severely injured. That person was the 9th most powerful person in the world, Li Huantian, who was a Khanate stage martial artist. After Li Huantian recovered, he gave the Heaven Summoning Order to Nangong Tian and even made a promise that if the Nangong family were to be wiped out within 100 years, as long as he was still alive, his descendants could come to Mount Langia to look for him. He would definitely help the Nangong family once. It doesn't matter if he's still alive or not. He's our last hope. Nangong Tian held the token tightly in his hand and said in a deep voice. A private jet soared into the sky. No one knew that Nangong Tian was holding the Heaven Summoning Order and was taking the private jet to Mount Langia to look for the legendary 9th most powerful person in the world, Li Huantian. Chapter 75. It was a spacious courtyard house with a history of 100 years. The ancient walls were engraved with the marks of time. The courtyard house was very large and gave people a retro feeling. There were a lot of potted plants in the courtyard and the air was filled with the fragrance of plants. Yi Xian sat upright in a pavilion. Beside him were Ling Long and Tai Li, who were on his left and right. Mr. Yi, you told Master Azure Dragon not to investigate this matter. How can we find the culprit? Ling Long asked carefully. Have you heard of the saying, guilty conscience? Yi Xian smiled. Looking at Yi Xian's smiling face, Ling Long seemed to understand something. She carefully probed, what you mean is that the culprit knows you're in the capital. Even if you don't look for him, he'll be worried and won't just sit there and wait for death. He'll definitely expose his tracks. That's right. Since this person wants me dead, he must hate me to the core. As long as I'm in the capital, he'll have to live in torment every day. This torment will make him unable to sleep at night. Naturally, he'll do some stupid things. Yi Xian chuckled. Brilliant, brilliant. Mr. Yi, your wisdom is as vast as the sea. Truly brilliant. Tai Li licked his face and flattered him. However, the words spoken by a boor like him instantly caused the atmosphere to become awkward. Yi Xian felt suffocated as he helplessly glanced at Tai Li, but didn't say anything. Big brother Tai, stop talking. Ling Long covered her forehead. Her face was a little red. She obviously felt a little embarrassed. This is the Extreme Yin Heart Sutra. It's a body training method that I created in the past 2 days. If you cultivate according to this method, it'll naturally solve the problem of your soul. Yi Xian took out a book and handed it to Ling Long. This made her happy and she kept thanking Yi Xian. Mr. Yi, you're not joking, right? Master Poison is a saint in the medical world. Even he couldn't cure Ling Long's illness. You just took out a secret book. How can this cure Ling Long? Tai Li didn't know how to keep his mouth shut. He just said whatever was on his mind. Big brother Tai, you. Ling Long was furious. Ling Long was furious and was about to scold Tai Li, but before she could finish speaking, Yi Xian waved his hand and interrupted her. Ling Long's soul is powerful. Even if she cultivates for dozens of years, her body won't be able to withstand her powerful soul, and this Extreme Yin Heart Sutra is compatible with her physique. 1 year of her cultivation is equivalent to 10 years of ordinary cultivation. When she steps into the Xiantian realm, the hidden dangers in her body will disappear without a trace. As Yi Xian spoke up to hear, his eyes were deep as he looked at Ling Long and continued, moreover, once you step into the Xiantian realm, you will be an invincible existence within the same realm. Mr. Ha, that's great. Unfortunately. Before Tai Li could finish his ecstatic words, Yi Xian's voice teased, as long as you're not afraid of becoming a woman, you can cultivate this technique. Tai Li's wild laughter came to an abrupt end. He suddenly felt a chill in his crotch. His entire body shivered. Then, he became silent, which also attracted Ling Long's laughter. Time passed very quickly. A week had passed since Yi Xian arrived in the capital. During this period of time, the capital could be said to be peaceful. Nothing major happened. Yi Xian was also very free. Every day, he would give Ling Long some pointers. The rest of the time, he would stroll around the capital and look at some historical sites. It was a rare moment of leisure. However, the Yi family did not have it easy during this period of time. The members of the Wu and Bureau were constantly monitoring the Yi family's movements. From Yi Canghai and his son to the servants, everything they saw and what they ate turned into a large amount of information on Azure Dragon's desk. Pressure from all sides engulfed the Yi family. The military, politics, and business all suffered losses. If not for the fact that the Yi family was one of the 8 great families and the other families understood the principle of being intimately interdependent, the Yi family would have already collapsed under this pressure. During this period of time, the Yi family sent an invitation to Yi Xian, hoping to ease their relationship with Yi Xian. However, the so-called invitation was directly thrown away by Yi Xian. He did not even look at it. There were still 3 days before the Wu and Bureau's annual meeting. At the same time, Nangong Tian finally arrived at Mount Lang. Mount Lang. There was a clear lake with clear blue water. Occasionally, a few koi fish would jump out of the water, causing ripples to appear in the lake. A man in a white robe stood beside the lake with his hands behind his back. His hair was black, but his temples were silver. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was as if he had seen through everything in the world. He gave off a sense of tranquility and indifference. This man looked like a young man, but the aura he released from time to time made him seem like an old man in his twilight years. When this kind of contradictory feeling gathered on this person, it didn't give off a strange feeling, as if it was natural for him to do so. Junior Nangong Tian greets Senior Huantian. Nangong Tian's voice trembled as he knelt on the ground. The dozens of ancient martial artists behind him also knelt on the ground with reverence on their faces. They kept kowtowing to the man in front of them. Whoosh! His palm and fingers moved like the wind, creating a strange sound in the void. Before Nangong Tian could react, the heaven summoning token in his hand flew out and shot towards the man in front of him. Li Huantian was in a daze as he held the wooden token in his hand. He closed his eyes slightly and exerted force with his palm and fingers. Instantly, the wooden token turned into wood powder and flew into the void. Who is Nangong Hua to you? Li Huantian's voice was hoarse, but it gave off a strong sense of oppression. Nangong Hua is my ancestor, and I'm the current master of the Nangong family. I didn't want to disturb your cultivation, but the Nangong family has encountered an unprecedented enemy, and we're about to be destroyed. I have no choice but to shamelessly ask you to come out. Nangong Tian touched the ground with his forehead and said in an extremely respectful voice. There's no end to the heavenly Tao, and there's no hope for immortality. I didn't expect to be involved in the trivial matters of the mortal world when I'm about to die. Li Huantian sighed, and the aura around him suddenly became extremely terrifying. His innate gang qi exploded in the void, and his murderous and desolate aura spread out at this moment. Fine, fine. The promise of the past has to be fulfilled. Let me, Li Huantian, see what kind of up-and-coming talents will appear in the Central Plains 100 years later. We welcome Senior Huantian to come out. Nangong Tian trembled continuously, causing the ancient martial artists behind him to kowtow again. Flying snow. Clang clang clang. Li Huantian shouted in a deep voice. A blue stone in the middle of the pool suddenly burst into pieces. A cold sword light crossed the sky and shot toward Li Huantian. With the flying snow sword in hand, Li Huantian's aura suddenly changed. He seemed to have turned into an unsheathed sharp sword that would cut down any living being that stood in his way. Chapter 76. In the outskirts of the capital, at the headquarters of the Wusan department. In the spacious parking lot, there were all sorts of luxurious and low-key cars parked there. Familiar names constantly alighted from the cars. They were all famous tycoons from all walks of life. During the annual meeting of the Wusan department, they were all fighting to watch this grand event. What kind of existence was the Wusan department? There was no area that they couldn't control. Whether it was facing the strong enemies of other countries or cleaning up the hidden dangers of the country, the Wusan department was an extremely powerful organization in the upper class of society. The world was bustling for profit, and the world was bustling for profit. Everyone had their own thoughts. If they could establish a relationship with the Wusan department, it would be extremely beneficial for them. And to be able to attend the annual meeting of the Wusan department was also an affirmation of their status. The 8 great families of the capital, the big shots of the military, the tycoons of the business world, the big shots of the political world. When these people greeted each other, everyone's faces revealed a smile. They even called out to their acquaintances and entered the Wusan department headquarters together. A black car slowly drove into the parking lot. Tai Li was the first to open the car door and respectfully invited Yi Xian to get out. When Yi Xian appeared, the slightly noisy parking lot suddenly quieted down. All sorts of gazes were focused on Yi Xian. This person is Yi Xian. He's a guest of the Earth group. It can't be. Such a young man is in such a high position. Shoo, lower your voice. I heard that this Mr. Yi killed many people from the Yi family. Even the big shots above seem to have an extremely complicated relationship with this person. Although their voices were very soft, they all fell into Yi Xian's ears. However, Yi Xian's expression was expressionless. How could he care about what these people thought? Mr. Yi, Lord Azure Dragon is waiting for you inside. Tai Li and Ling Long led the way in front, while Yi Xian slowly followed. Only when the three of them entered the headquarters of the Wusan department did these celebrities from all walks of life stop talking. At this moment, looking at Yi Xian's back, Yi Canghai and his son felt extremely complicated. In the midst of everyone's discussion, the father and son could be considered to have lost all face, but this also left them helpless. Unfilial son. Yi Canghai snorted. Watch your mouth. No matter what, he's still your son. What kind of scandal is this if outsiders see it? Yi Canghai reprimanded. I understand, father. Yi Canghai sighed deeply. The headquarters of the Martial Security Department was full of technology. Here, one could see the most advanced equipment, colorful scientific research instruments, researchers in white coats, and ancient martial arts ability users walking by from time to time. If someone who did not understand this place saw this scene, they might think that the Wu-An department was a research department and would not dare to believe that this place was a law enforcement department. Earth Group Martial Arts Practice Field. When Yi Xian stepped out of the elevator, he was greeted by a spacious venue. There were all sorts of weapons, ranging from ancient cold weapons to modern weapons. It was a feast for the eyes. The sound of fists and feet dancing could be heard. Every member of the Earth team was cultivating themselves. It could be said that it was extremely lively. Alright, everyone take a break. Come and meet our Earth Group guest. The Azure Dragon clapped his hands and told the members of the Earth team to stop cultivating. Under the lead of the Azure Dragon, they walked towards Yi Xian. Greetings, Mr. Yi. The arrival of Yi Xian caused the morale of the members of the Earth team to rise. Everyone's eyes were filled with reverence. Although they did not have much contact with Yi Xian, they had all heard of Yi Xian's deeds. Mr. Yi, what do you think of the cultivation of these team members? The Azure Dragon said proudly. Do you want me to tell the truth, or do you want me to tell the truth? Yi Xian chuckled. Of course it's the truth. I still believe in your vision. You can speak your mind. These stinking brats, it's time to give them a blow. The Azure Dragon quickly said. Looking at the expectant gazes of the members of the Earth team, Yi Xian thought for a while and slowly said, in my opinion, your cultivation is very average and your explosive power is insufficient. If you meet a true expert, I'm afraid you will suffer greatly. When Yi Xian finished speaking, the scene fell silent. Although the members of the Earth team did not refute him, their eyes were filled with unwillingness. One had to know that for them to be chosen to join the Martial Security Department, they all had a proud side in the field of ancient martial arts. However, Yi Xian had directly rejected them, which was undoubtedly a blow to their self-esteem. Humph! Suddenly, a cold snort was heard. A middle-aged man walked out from the crowd and looked at Yi Xian with a hint of hostility in his eyes. Guest Elder Yi, I think you are too arrogant. Our Earth team members have been through hundreds of battles, and we have carried out countless dangerous missions. They are the mainstays of the Earth team. Even if you are our guest elder, you cannot slander them like this. The middle-aged man said coldly. Instructor Chu is right. Although Mr. Ye's cultivation is strong and we can't compare to you, many villains have been captured by us. Many of our brothers have died in every mission. That's right. Although our cultivation is very weak in Mr. Ye's eyes, all of us are very hardworking and have never slacked off on our own cultivation. A middle-aged man took the lead and spoke out. Finally, a member of the Earth team began to refute Yi Xian. When the Azure Dragon saw this scene, his expression changed slightly, but he did not say anything. It was obvious that the Azure Dragon had seen how hard the members of the Earth team trained every day. Although he admired Yi Xian's cultivation, he did not believe Yi Xian's words on this matter. Alright, Instructor Chu, how can you talk to Mr. Yi like that? The Azure Dragon pretended to reprimand him. Group leader, I'm just talking about things. Chu Tianhe said proudly. Who was Yi Xian? He was an immortal cultivator, so his mind was very sensitive. How could he not see the current situation? Since the Azure Dragon and the others did not believe what he said, then there was no need for him to explain. But just as Yi Xian did not want to dwell on this matter, Chu Tianhe sneered again. It's rumored that guest elder Yi is a pre-celestial expert. I'm not talented, and my ancient martial arts cultivation is only at the Grandmaster realm. I've never seen a pre-celestial expert in my life, so I want to ask you for advice. Chu Tianhe's eager expression immediately caused the Azure Dragon's face to turn cold. He immediately reprimanded him. Instructor Chu, you are not a match for Mr. Yi. Why aren't you retreating? When did you become so unruly? Unfortunately, under the Azure Dragon's reprimand, Chu Tianhe only sneered as he looked at Yi Xian. His provocative expression was extremely obvious. Lord Azure Dragon, you've always said that Mr. Ye's cultivation is unfathomable. Since Mr. Yi is here today, why don't you show us your skills? Yeah, the other 7 team members are laughing at our Earth group. They said that Lord Azure Dragon found a young man to be a guest elder of the Earth group. They even said that Mr. Yi had connections with the higher-ups to sit in our Earth group's guest elder position. All sorts of comments appeared, and the members of the Earth group also started to jeer. This caused the Azure Dragon's face to darken, and he was about to reprimand them. Without waiting for the Azure Dragon to speak, Yi Xian looked at Chu Tianhe and said calmly, ever since I came here, you have been trying to target me. Although I don't know why, I can see the dissatisfaction in your eyes. That's right, I just can't accept you. What can you do? Chu Tianhe was very straightforward, and directly admitted to what Yi Xian said. He. Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed, but this kind of smile was slightly sinister, causing Chu Tianhe's heart to tighten. He looked at Yi Xian with a serious expression. I'm a very reasonable person. It's just that those who don't accept me are already dead. I wonder if you want to give it a try. Yi Xian said with a smile. Domineering and fierce, like a mountain pressing down on people. The words humble and low-key could not be reflected on Yi Xian at all. Chapter 77. When Yi Xian finished speaking, the members of the Earth team burst into an uproar. They all started to jeer as they looked eagerly at Chu Tianhe. In fact, the reason why Chu Tianhe deliberately targeted Yi Xian was because the position of a guest elder had been empty for 10 years. This was also his goal for many years, but it was taken away by Yi Xian halfway. How could he be willing to accept this? Chu Tianhe also understood that for Yi Xian to be able to become a guest elder of the Earth team, his strength was definitely not an embroidered pillow. However, he also firmly believed that as an ancient martial arts master, even if he could not defeat Yi Xian, as long as he could fight to a draw with the other party, it would make Yi Xian lose a lot of face. Chu Tianhe's thoughts were very clear. No matter what the result was, he had earned enough face. This also caused him to laugh coldly and say, anyone can speak empty words. I hope guest elder Yi won't cry too miserably later. Chu Tianhe strode into the training field and turned his head to look at Yi Xian with a sinister smile on his face. Mr. Yi Xian, please show mercy. The Azure Dragon said anxiously, afraid that Yi Xian would take Chu Tianhe's life. What a pity. Yi Xian didn't respond in the slightest. He had a smile on his face the entire time. When he took a step forward, he suddenly appeared in front of Chu Tianhe, causing his expression to change. He continuously retreated, maintaining a safe distance from Yi Xian. Chu Tianhe did not see clearly how Yi Xian appeared in the arena. It was not only him who did not see clearly, but also the members of the Azure Dragon and the Earth team. However, Chu Tianhe unconsciously swallowed his saliva. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and his back was already drenched in sweat. Regret had already risen in his heart. As the old saying goes, one can see the whole leopard from a single spot. Chu Tianhe deeply understood that with the other party appearing in front of him without him noticing, if he were to directly attack him, he would definitely not be able to react in time. Yi. Mr. Yi, good movement technique. Chu Tianhe forced a laugh, but if one listened carefully, they would notice that his voice was trembling. Instructor Chu, do your best. Instructor Chu, let Mr. Yi see the strength of our Earth group. On the stage, the two of them stood facing each other. Below the stage, the members of the Earth group cheered for Chu Tianhe, and all sorts of excited shouts could be heard. Come. Yi Xian crooked his finger, a smile on his face the entire time. But this provocative action caused Chu Tianhe's face to turn red, and his eyes filled with shame and anger. You're courting death. Bang! Chu Tianhe was finally enraged. He abruptly exerted force on his feet, causing the ground paved with fine steel to crack. His iron palms swung through the air as he charged violently toward Yi Xian like a ferocious tiger descending the mountain. It's the Great Monument Smashing Hand. It's actually the Great Monument Smashing Hand. This is the martial skill that Instructor Chu is famous for. A member of the Earth team shouted in shock, his eyes filled with excitement. This Mr. Yi Xian is definitely going to lose. Instructor Chu's Great Monument Breaking Hand can crack rocks and break gold. Even if they're both ancient martial arts masters, very few people would dare to take Instructor Chu's attack head-on. Someone else spoke with certainty, as if they had already seen the scene of Yi Xian's defeat. Bang! Suddenly, a muffled sound rang out. When the scene on the stage appeared in front of everyone's eyes, their originally excited expressions completely disappeared. Their faces even turned sluggish. How is this possible? What kind of joke is this? After a few breaths of time, the members of the Earth team exclaimed loudly. They could not believe what they were seeing. On the stage, Yi Xian did not move, the smile on his face was the same as ever, but his sparkling and translucent jade-like palm was currently grabbing onto Chu Tianhe's neck, and was even lifting him into the air. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Chu Tianhe's face was purple, and crisp sounds kept coming from his throat. His forelimbs were randomly kicking in the air, as if he was a weak chicken waiting to be slaughtered. TSK, TSK, TSK. Yi Xian slowly shook his head, a cold light flashing across his eyes. His voice was still calm as he said, "Too weak, you're really too weak. Let me go." I admit defeat, Chu Tianhe said with difficulty. He could completely feel how terrifying the power contained in the palm that was grabbing onto his neck was. If it was a moment later, he would definitely be strangled to death by the other party. His heart and guts were torn apart, and the invasion of life and death was what Chu Tianhe was feeling right now. Didn't I say that I'm a very reasonable person? Since you don't want to accept me, then you can only become a dead man. Yi Xian seemed to be talking about a very normal matter, but when it entered the ears of the crowd, it made their hair stand on end, as if they had fallen into the abyss of hell. Mr. Yi, please show mercy. The Azure Dragon's face was pale as he spoke out anxiously. Bang! Yi Xian moved his palm, and with a slap, he sent Chu Tianhe flying, and even caused the sound of bones breaking to ring out. A large amount of blood spurted out from Chu Tianhe's mouth, and his entire body spun 365 degrees in the air, and suddenly smashed into the stage. Puff! Blood stained the stage, mixed with a few teeth. Chu Tianhe's body was constantly twitching, and the members of the Earth group who were watching this scene had already become deathly silent, as if their souls had left their bodies. Dong, dong, dong. Like raging waves crashing against the shore, like rocks piercing through the air, Yi Xian slowly walked forward until he arrived in front of Chu Tianhe. His wide feet suddenly stepped on Chu Tianhe's face, and he continued to crush it back and forth. I'm a very reasonable person. I'll give you a chance now. As long as you say the word, submit, I'll spare your life today. Yi Xian said calmly. At this moment, Chu Tianhe was so ashamed and furious that he was seriously injured. When he heard Yi Xian's words, his heart was about to explode from anger. He was the instructor of the Earth group, yet he had lost so much face today. However, Chu Tianhe knew very well that if he really said the word submit, he would lose a lot of prestige in front of the members of the Earth Group. No. Impossible. Chu Tianhe roared weakly, pretending to be a tough guy. Ah. As soon as Chu Tianhe finished speaking, he let out an extremely miserable cry of pain. Half of his head was suddenly stomped into the ground by Yi Xian, and a large amount of blood flowed out from his head. If Chu Tianhe was not an ancient martial arts grandmaster and had a strong physical body, Yi Xian's kick would have taken his life. In the face of so-called dignity and life, it seems that you have chosen dignity. Is it not good to live? Yi Xian made a strange sound and raised his foot again. His voice became extremely sinister as he continued, since you want to pretend to be a hero, I'll fulfill your wish. Chu Tianhe was truly afraid. He could feel that Yi Xian was not joking. He was afraid that he would really take his life in the next moment. Wang! Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. When his foot landed, an explosive sound came from the air, causing the members of the Earth Group to cry out in alarm. It also caused the Azure Dragon's face to turn pale as he pleaded, Mr. Yi, please spare his life. I submit. At this critical moment, Chu Tianhe finally cowered. His voice trembled as he begged for mercy. Large amounts of tears flowed out of his eyes. It was obvious that he was extremely humiliated. Chapter 78. A living ancient martial arts grandmaster directly cried out. When this scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, everyone's faces revealed complicated expressions. Yi Xian bullied people. He bullied people very much. It could be said that he bullied people to the extreme, and this was also the result he wanted. Yi Xian had always believed in one sentence. If a dog bites a person, the person will naturally not bite back. However, Yi Xian's method was to break the other party's dog leg and let the other party remember it for the rest of his life. The cold killing intent disappeared. Yi Xian bent down to help Chu Tianhe up and even helped him tidy up his wrinkled clothes. He smiled and said, Instructor Chu, I'm really sorry. Actually, I was just joking. Please don't blame me. Looking at Yi Xian's smiling face, Chu Tianhe's entire body tensed up. Even his teeth were unconsciously chattering. He looked at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a demon. His heart was filled with great fear. No. It's fine. Chu Tianhe forced a laugh, but his smile was even uglier than crying. No, wrong. Chu Tianhe was already crying. However, he really did not want to meet Yi Xian again because he was really afraid of Yi Xian. The person in front of him was temperamental and was simply a devil. Men, take Instructor Chu down to treat his injuries. Azure Dragon sighed and also had a member of the Earth team help Chu Tianhe to the infirmary. Yi Xian slowly walked down the stage, but the members of the Earth team unconsciously retreated. They looked at Yi Xian with a look of reverence that they had never seen before. Obviously, Yi Xian's methods had allowed them to truly experience what it meant to be a fiend. Looking at everyone's fearful expressions, Yi Xian's heart did not waver in the slightest. In fact, there was a huge reason why he did this. Establishing his might, that's right, establishing his might. Today, Chu Tianhe alone had dared to target him. If Yi Xian didn't strike like lightning and teach him a lesson, it was hard to guarantee that there would be others who would imitate Chu Tianhe and cause trouble for him in the future. Although Yi Xian wasn't afraid of people finding trouble with him, this kind of trivial matter would annoy him to no end. And the effect in front of him was very obvious. Yi Xian had already established a fierce character in front of the members of the Earth Group. Mr. Yi, I really admire you. Azure Dragon said with a bitter smile. My methods were a little extreme, but it saved me a lot of trouble. Don't blame me, Yi Xian said calmly. Azure Dragon wouldn't dare to blame you, sir. It was Chu Tianhe who didn't know his place. He brought this upon himself, Azure Dragon said. The two of them chatted for a while before taking a seat and starting to talk about the Martial Security Bureau's annual meeting. Time passed very quickly. An hour later, Yi Xian also found out about the situation of the Earth Group from the Azure Dragon. This also made the Azure Dragon look embarrassed, and he was a little embarrassed to face Yi Xian. When the time comes, I will need Mr. Yi to make a move. Just don't hurt the other groups of guests. The Azure Dragon carefully probed. It's fine, it's just a small matter. Yi Xian said calmly. While the two of them were talking, the surrounding members of the Earth Group started to cultivate again. However, from time to time, they would peek at Yi Xian from the corner of their eyes filled with complicated emotions. In the ancient martial arts world, they believed that the strong were respected. Today, Yi Xian had made a move with lightning speed, allowing them to see what a true expert was. This also caused some people to have some thoughts in their hearts. Zhang Shaochang was an ordinary member of the Earth Group. His ancient martial arts cultivation was only at the early stage of the concealing strength. Although he trained hard every day, he was an extremely weak existence in the Earth Group. He even had a shameful nickname, Zhang Shaorua. Zhang Shaochang's heart was currently in a dilemma. When he saw Yi Xian defeat Chu Tianhe in an instant, he was extremely afraid of Yi Xian. However, Zhang Shaochang's heart was restless, because he had heard Yi Xian mention that their cultivation was average, and their explosive power was insufficient. This was also his greatest weakness in ancient martial arts cultivation. After hesitating for a long time, Zhang Shaochang seemed to have a voice in his heart telling him that if he did not ask Yi Xian for guidance now, he would not know when he would be able to see this guest Yi again. If he did not seize this opportunity, he would probably regret it for the rest of his life. Zhang Shaochang quickly made a decision, his face flushed red, but under the astonished gazes of the members of the Earth Group, he walked towards Yi Xian with extreme determination. Yi. Mr. Yi. You just said that we don't have enough explosive power. Can you give this junior some pointers? Zhang Shaochang's face flushed red, he did not dare to look into Yi Xian's eyes, his voice trembling slightly, he was obviously extremely nervous. Nonsense, I'm talking about business with Mr. Yi, you. Without waiting for the Azure Dragon to finish speaking, Yi Xian waved his hand and interrupted him, causing the Azure Dragon to be startled and swallow the words of reprimand in his mouth. You're not ashamed to ask. This is the potential that an expert should have. You're not bad. Yi Xian smiled and nodded, then stood up from his seat and walked towards an iron pillar. This also caused Zhang Shaochang to suddenly raise his head, a look of gratitude appearing in his eyes, and he quickly followed behind Yi Xian. Such a scene naturally caused the members of the Earth Group to scramble to watch, and there were even whispers of discussion. I didn't see it, but Zhang Shaorua is so bold, he actually dares to disturb Yi Xian. What do you know? Shaorua has always been very hard-working in his cultivation, but he hasn't made any progress. He's also taking a risk. If you ask me, Shaorua is doing something unnecessary. The path of cultivation is a step-by-step process. Even if this Mr. Ye's cultivation is terrifying, how much can he improve in terms of martial arts? All sorts of discussions rang out. At this moment, Zhang Shaochang's face was flushed red, so he naturally heard it. However, the determination in his eyes did not change in the slightest. An iron pillar was made of fine iron, so its hardness was naturally extraordinary. Use your greatest strength to strike this iron pillar. Yi Xian turned around and looked at Zhang Shaochang. Yes, Mr. Yi. Zhang Shaochang focused his mind and calmed his qi, ignoring the discussions of the people around him. After a dozen breaths, he felt that he was already at his peak state, and directly clenched his fist and punched the iron pillar. Bang! With a muffled sound, the iron pillar swayed slightly and emitted a buzzing sound. Not even a trace of a fist mark was left behind, causing Zhang Shaochang to lower his head in shame. The foot is the root of the earth. The body must be as immovable as a mountain, the spine must be like a dragon, and the blood energy must be like the ocean. With the belt as the hip, with the hip as the arm, with the arm as the fist, condensing the blood energy in the entire body into one point. It was as if the morning bell and evening drum were ringing, as if the light of dawn was attacking. When Yi Xian's voice sounded out, Zhang Shaochang's face froze, and a confused look appeared in his eyes, as if he had fallen into deep thought. After a full 10 minutes, Zhang Shaochang's body did not move, and the surrounding members of the Earth group had looks of contempt in their eyes, as if they were about to disperse. Ha! Suddenly, Zhang Shaochang opened his eyes, and a ray of light flashed across his eyes. With an explosive sound from his mouth, he once again turned his palm into a fist, and the fist light was like a resplendent meteor, violently smashing towards the iron pillar in front of him. Dong! When the fist and iron collided, there was no strange sound. Just as everyone helplessly shook their heads and was about to disperse, an extremely soft and crisp sound came from the iron pillar, causing the surrounding members of the Earth group to widen their eyes as they looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. The iron pillar made of fine iron was cracking like a spider web, and a large number of iron pieces continued to fall to the ground. Until a loud bang rang out, and the iron pillar suddenly exploded into pieces. The dazzling iron stars scattered on the ground, as if they were about to pierce one's eyes to the point that one could not open one's eyes. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. The entire Earth group martial arts practice field was completely silent. After a full 10 breaths of time, the dumbstruck members of the Earth group all burst into an uproar. They even rushed over to Zhang Shaochang's side and continuously touched his body, as if they were looking at a rare treasure. Xiao Ruo. No. Shaochang. Did you really do this? A member of the Earth group asked in shock. This. How is this possible? Shaochang is only at the dark stage, how could he break the iron pillar? All sorts of clamorous discussions could be heard, and Zhang Shaochang also stared blankly at the scattered pieces of iron on the ground. He kept stroking his palm, as if he had fallen into a daze. Yi. Mr. Yi. Thank you. Zhang Shaochang finally woke up from his daze, and tears of joy flowed out of his eyes. He directly knelt in front of Yi Xian, and continuously kowtowed to thank him. This also caused them to look at Yi Xian with an extremely warm expression. There were even some who were ready to move, wanting to go up and ask Yi Xian to give them some pointers. Unfortunately, before the members of the Earth group could arrive in front of Yi Xian, the Azure Dragon strode over and waved them away. Then, he looked at the iron pieces on the ground in shock, and bowed to Yi Xian. Mr. Yi, previously, the Azure Dragon was ignorant, now I apologize to you. Chapter 79. It's fine, you don't have to be like this. Yi Xian smiled. Seeing that Yi Xian had no intention of blaming him, the Azure Dragon finally relaxed. He then scolded Zhang Shaochang with a smile, "Brat, hurry up and get up. Mr. Yi doesn't like kowtowing bugs." Zhang Shaochang quickly stood up, his expression extremely excited, and looked at Yi Xian with a gaze of worship. It was no wonder that Zhang Shaochang was so excited. He had been ridiculed in the Earth group for the past few years, but today, under Yi Xian's guidance, he finally felt proud and elated, and even saw the bright path ahead of him. The Azure Dragon instructed Zhang Shaochang to cultivate well and not let down Yi Xian's kindness in guiding him. This also made Zhang Shaochang nod his head repeatedly, once again thanking Yi Xian. Then, under the envious gazes of the members of the Earth group, he entered the martial arts arena to cultivate. Mr. Yi, I have a presumptuous request. I hope you can agree to it. When Yi Xian and Yi Xian sat down again, the Azure Dragon looked at Yi Xian with hope in his eyes and said. Without needing the Azure Dragon to say anything, Yi Xian already knew what the other party wanted to say. It was obvious that the Azure Dragon had seen the change in Zhang Shaochang and wanted to ask Yi Xian to help him teach the members of the Earth group. There's no need to personally teach them. I will write a cultivation guide for you. I believe they will also make great progress. Yi Xian said softly. The Azure Dragon also knew that his request was somewhat difficult to fulfill, but to be able to achieve such a result made him very excited. Naturally, he did not dare to force Yi Xian to personally teach the members of the Earth Group. Ha! Brother Azure Dragon, I heard that your Earth Group finally has a guest elder. Can you introduce me to him? Suddenly, a loud laugh came from afar as a few people walked out of the elevator. The person in the lead was a middle-aged man with a sinister face and a pair of inverted triangular eyes that were slightly narrowed, giving off a feeling that he was not a good person. The Azure Dragon's face turned cold as he said in a gloomy voice, Mr. Yi, I forgot to tell you that the Wu Jun you killed back then was actually this person's sworn brother. This person's name is White Wolf, and he is the leader of the Xian group. His ice ability has already stepped into the A realm. Yi Xian's expression remained the same when he heard the introduction of the Azure Dragon. He finally understood why Wu Jun was able to run rampant in Jiangnan City for so many years even though he was only at the dark stage. It seemed like it was also because of this person's support. Every year, Wu Jun would give a lot of money to the White Wolf. The two of them seemed to be sworn brothers, but in reality, Wu Jun was just a tool for the White Wolf to amass wealth. Although it was a tool, the fact that Wu Jun was killed by Yi Xian naturally caused White Wolf to burn with rage. However, the orders from above made it difficult for White Wolf to openly cause trouble for Yi Xian. Furthermore, Yi Xian had become a guest of the Earth Group, which made White Wolf remember Yi Xian even more. This must be Mr. Yi, right? White Wolf brought a group of subordinates to Yi Xian. The smile on his face was extremely warm, and he even extended his right hand. It seemed like he wanted to shake hands with Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not move, and looked at White Wolf indifferently. This also caused him to be startled, and a trace of killing intent flashed across his eyes. He then quietly retracted his right hand, and there was no awkwardness on his face. Let me introduce myself. I am the leader of the Xian group, White Wolf. I have long heard of Mr. Ye's great name. A subordinate quickly brought over a chair. White Wolf directly sat opposite Yi Xian as if there was no one else around. A sinister smile appeared on his face. Bang! The Azure Dragon slammed the table and stood up. His voice was ice cold as he said, White Wolf, this is my Earth Group's martial arts practice field. Ha! White Wolf shook his head and laughed. He kept slamming the table as if he had heard a very funny joke. Suddenly, his pair of inverted triangular eyes slowly narrowed as he looked at Yi Xian like a venomous snake. He said, Yi Xian, I know you have some connections with the higher-ups, but you have to know that Wu'an is not as simple as you think. If you want to gain a foothold in Wu'an, have you asked me, White Wolf? Ta ta ta. The sound of hurried footsteps came from all directions. The members of the Earth Group had all gathered behind Azure Dragon and Yi Xian. The way they looked at White Wolf and the others was even more hostile. As for the subordinates behind White Wolf, their eyes were wide open. Their auras were not inferior to the members of the Earth Group. It was as if the two sides were about to fight in the next moment. White Wolf, looks like the martial arts competition hasn't even started yet, and you can't wait to fight with me. Azure Dragon sneered again and again. His clothes fluttered in the wind as he looked at White Wolf with a cold gaze. TSK TSK TSK. With a smile on his face, he looked at Azure Dragon and the others and said, Lord Azure Dragon's martial arts cultivation is naturally extraordinary. I do not dare to fight with you. What a pity, all of your subordinates are trash. In my opinion, after the martial arts competition ends, you should tell the higher-ups that the Earth Group should be disbanded. At that time, Lord Azure Dragon will come to my Xian group. Although you can't be the team leader anymore, you can still be my assistant. Ridicule, provocation, arrogance, this was the attitude displayed by the White Wolf. This also caused the Azure Dragon's expression to turn extremely cold. The members of the Earth Group behind him were even more furious. They couldn't wait to attack right now and teach the White Wolf a lesson. Azure Dragon was not a person who was good at words. At this moment, his chest was about to explode from anger. When he clenched his fists, crackling sounds could be heard, as if he was about to attack White Wolf in the next moment. Hee hee. Looking at Azure Dragon's furious expression, White Wolf laughed sinisterly. He also knew what it meant to stop before going too far. If the two sides really fought here, he wouldn't be able to explain it to the higher-ups. The Earth group is trash, and even the guest is trash. You can rest assured that when the martial arts competition begins, my Xian group will naturally show mercy. Ha! White Wolf laughed loudly and stood up. He called out to the members of the Xian group and walked towards the elevator. From the beginning to the end, Yi Xian's expression was calm. He did not express any opinion, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Mr. Yi, this White Wolf insulted you and our Earth group so much, why don't you teach him a lesson? Some of the members of the Earth group were furious. Could it be that their guest was really a coward? A smile appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth, and his calm voice also came out from Yi Xian's mouth. He's just a dead man, why should I lower myself to his level? White Wolf, who had already walked to the elevator, stopped in his tracks when he heard Yi Xian's words. He even turned his head to look at Yi Xian, then smiled sinisterly. I've seen many shameless people, but they've all become dead people. Don't disappoint me. You will die miserably, I promise. Yi Xian smiled, as if he was talking about something very casual. Chapter 80. Humph. The White Wolf snorted coldly and finally left with the members of the Xian group. However, in the elevator, the sinister look in the White Wolf's eyes was abnormally intense. Inform guest Elder Lien and tell him that although there are people above this Yi Xian and it's not easy to kill him, it's still possible to cripple him, right? The White Wolf sneered sinisterly. Earth Group Martial Arts Practice Field. The members of the ground were furious, and the Azure Dragon's expression was extremely unsightly. Only Yi Xian remained calm. From time to time, he would sip the tea in his cup, feeling relaxed. It's just a clown, yet it caused your emotions to surge. You guys have disappointed me too much. Yi Xian slowly shook his head. He then turned to look at the members of the Earth group and said, Mr. Yi is right, this person is just a clown. As long as you guys do your best in the martial competition, you will definitely not lose to the members of the Xian group. That's right. Although our Earth group is at the bottom every year, their Xian group might not be much stronger than us. When the time comes, we'll show them some power. Yes, we want to beat these dogs to death. The members of the Earth group all spoke out. With anger in their hearts, they once again began to seriously cultivate. Looking at the figures of the members of the Earth group, a trace of worry flashed across the Azure Dragon's eyes. As the leader of the Earth group, how could he not know the standards of these members? According to the overall strength of the members of the Earth group, they were indeed weaker than the members of the Xian group. This was also the reason why the White Wolf was so arrogant. Yi Xian seemed to have seen through the Azure Dragon's worries. This also made Yi Xian pat the Azure Dragon's shoulder and say, Don't worry, send Zhang Shaochang to participate in this martial competition. He should be able to win glory for the Earth group. Mr. Yi, you might not know this, but the members of the various groups that can participate in the martial competition are all at the transforming strength stage, and some of them are only one step away from stepping into the Grandmaster realm. Although Zhang Shaochang has received your guidance, he is still only at the dark strength stage. How can he go on stage? The Azure Dragon said worriedly. Cultivation doesn't represent strength. You can send him out without worry. Yi Xian did not explain too much, but the confidence he exuded made Azure Dragon secretly shocked. He could only follow Yi Xian's instructions and arrange for Zhang Shaochang to be on the martial arts competitions list. Lord Azure Dragon, the annual meeting is about to begin. The director wants me to inform you that you can enter the venue. Not long after, a young woman arrived and informed the ground team to hurry to the venue. Mr. Yi, let's go. The Azure Dragon and Yi Xian walked side by side. The members of the Earth group followed behind them and headed straight for the venue. At the same time, in the capital, dozens of military vehicles cleared the way in front, and dozens of luxurious vehicles that were worth tens of millions of dollars followed them. Such a luxurious scene made the citizens of Jingdo stop to watch. They wondered which big shot had set out on a trip to arrange such a scene. The extended Rolls-Royce Phantom was a limited edition of 5 models in the world. Surrounded by many luxury cars, it slowly drove toward the headquarters of the Wu and department. In the car, a flying snow sword was placed horizontally on Li Huantian's knees. Li Huantian's face was expressionless as if he was resting with his eyes closed. Nangong Tian's face was flushed red, and his body was trembling uncontrollably. He glanced at Li Huantian from the corner of his eyes from time to time with extreme respect in his eyes. Ever since he found Li Huantian, a series of twists and turns had made Nangong Tian realize how terrifying Li Huantian was. His range of influence was even greater. A heaven summoning token was sent directly to the ancient martial arts families. It immediately caused a huge earthquake in the ancient martial arts world. Countless ancient martial arts families rushed to Jingdo, wanting to meet the 9th expert in the world from 100 years ago. The 9th expert in the world, Li Huantian, was a legendary figure. He was also the existence at the peak of the ancient martial arts world. Although Li Huantian had not appeared in the world for 100 years, the legends that he left behind in the ancient martial arts world were still talked about enthusiastically. Nangong Tian was very excited and emotional. The arrival of these ancient martial arts families would naturally strengthen the reputation of the Nangong family. Furthermore, Anta had agreed to join forces with him to kill Yi Xian. Although the Xia country found out about this and the Nangong family no longer had a foothold in the Xia country, he had already made preparations. As long as he killed Yi Xian, he would leave the Xia country with his family. Furthermore, Nangong Tian firmly believed that Li Huantian, who was beside him, would be able to kill Yi Xian without Anta's help. Everything was ready. Although Nangong Tian was extremely confident, he still made preparations just in case. Yi Xian, it's time for you to die. Nangong Tian muttered to himself with extreme hatred. There was an extremely cruel look in his eyes. At the annual meeting at the headquarters of the Wuan Agency, the venue was packed with people. There were more than 10 arenas, and the seats were filled with celebrities from all walks of life. The members of the 8 teams of the Wuan Agency entered the resting area one after another, waiting for the annual meeting to begin. At the resting area of the Earth team, Azure Dragon and Yi Xian sat side by side. The members of the Earth team behind them looked excited. It was obvious that some of them would be competing soon. While waiting for the annual meeting to begin, Azure Dragon also introduced the situation of the Wuan Agency to Yi Xian in detail. The Wuan Agency was divided into 8 teams: Heaven, Earth, Black, Yellow, and Universe. The Heaven, Earth, Black, and Yellow teams dealt with various matters in the Xia country. They were also the 4 teams with the most members. The Universe, Black, and Yellow teams were extremely mysterious. Their abilities were also extremely complicated. Even Azure Dragon didn't know much about them. However, there were very few members in the 4 teams. The Desolate team had the fewest members, and there were only 4 of them, including the team leader. In terms of strength, the strongest was the U group. Although there were only 8 members, each of them was a master-level character. There were even rumors that the U group's Lord Tianyu was a Xiantian master, but this rumor had never been confirmed. As for the so-called martial arts competition, if it was said to be a competition between the 8 teams, it would be more accurate to say that the Heaven, Earth, Black, and Yellow teams were competing for rankings. The Universe, Black, and Yellow teams wouldn't send anyone to compete at all. The rankings of the Universe, Black, and Yellow teams had never changed. They were also high and mighty existences. Although there weren't many people in these 4 teams, none of them were simple. As Azure Dragon explained the situation of the Wuan agency in detail, Yi Xian slowly nodded. However, his expression was calm, and it was obvious that there was no fluctuation in his heart. It was also at this moment that a deep gaze landed on Yi Xian, causing him to look for the owner of the gaze. Yu Team's resting area. When Yi Xian and Tian Yu's gazes met, Tian Yu smiled and nodded towards Yi Xian. Then, he shifted his gaze away. His expression was very calm, as if he had only casually glanced at Yi Xian. He didn't show any strange emotions, but a hint of surprise flashed across Tian Yu's eyes. A little interesting. Yi Xian's cultivation was so terrifying that he could see through Tian Yu's cultivation with a single glance. This also caused a playful expression to appear in his eyes. He had developed a strong interest in this Yu team leader. Yi Xian retracted his gaze and looked towards the rest of the 6 teams, hoping to find something that would interest him. The black team's white wolf sneered. He directly made a throat-slitting gesture towards Yi Xian. His actions were extremely provocative. Team leader Huang Zhu was a burly man with a rough body. He only had a master-level cultivation. He cupped his fists towards Yi Xian from afar, which could be considered a greeting. The Heaven team leader was a youth with icy blue hair. He emitted an aura that kept people away. He only glanced at Yi Xian, and didn't have any intention of greeting him. The Universe team leader was a weathered old man. He smiled and nodded towards Yi Xian. The Hong team leader was a middle-aged man. He had a head of fiery red hair that was like a raging flame. He gave off an extremely violent aura. When Yi Xian looked towards the desolate team leader, a look of astonishment flashed across his eyes. He suddenly stood up and released his divine sense, attacking the desolate team leader. The desolate team leader was the only woman. She wore a long white dress and looked elegant and dignified. She gave off the feeling of a pretty girl from a humble family, but she didn't lose her elegant temperament. At this moment, Yi Xian's sudden action naturally attracted the attention of many people. When they realized that Yi Xian was staring at the desolate team leader, a mocking look appeared in their eyes. As the desolate team leader, Xue Ji naturally felt that Yi Xian was acting strangely. She only frowned slightly and glanced at Yi Xian indifferently. A cold look appeared in her eyes. Clearly, she felt that Yi Xian's gaze was very unreasonable. Interesting, really interesting. I didn't expect that such a thing would appear in this world. Yi Xian retracted his divine sense. His voice was extremely unpredictable. Mr. Yi, what are you talking about? Please don't do anything rash. Lord Xueji is not to be trifled with, Azure Dragon hurriedly said, afraid that Yi Xian would do something unreasonable. Chapter 81. Logically speaking, Yi Xian was not a lecherous person. Azure Dragon was very sure of this. However, when Yi Xian walked towards Xuejie, Azure Dragon's heart began to waver. Gentle as jade, with a warm smile. This was the attitude that Yi Xian displayed. When he arrived at the desolate group's resting area and stood in front of Xuejie's expression turned ugly. Hello, my name is Yi Xian. May I know if we can get to know each other? Yi Xian's gaze was strange, and the smile on his face was unfathomable. Unfortunately, Yi Xian's greeting was ignored by the leader of the desolate group. Her delicate face did not change at all, as if Yi Xian was air. Ha! A soft laugh came from Yi Xian's mouth. Under everyone's astonished gazes, Yi Xian actually sat directly next to Xuejie. This caused the woman's expression to turn cold, and she looked at Yi Xian with disgust. I'm very curious. Logically speaking, this world is in the age of chaos. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth does not exist in this world, and the rules of the Great Path are untraceable. Even immortal cultivators cannot survive in this world. However, why do demons still exist in this world? I wonder if Lord Xuejie can explain this to me. Yi Xian stared at the woman in front of him as he spoke. His voice was extremely playful. Boom! It was as if thunder from the ninth heaven had exploded, and it was as if the waves of the vast ocean had come crashing down. When Xue Jie heard Yi Xian's words, panic instantly appeared on her originally unhappy face. Her fair and tender face became even paler, and she looked at Yi Xian with an extremely shocked expression. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Xue Jie's voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzzing. However, if one listened carefully, one would notice that her voice was trembling. Hee. Yi Xian got up from his seat and patted Xue Jie's shoulder affectionately. He said in a strange voice, "It doesn't matter if you don't understand. I'll look for you after this annual meeting." Yi Xian was still smiling, but it made Xue Jie feel cold all over. She looked at Yi Xian's back as he left, and there was a trace of panic in her eyes. She lowered her head, and no one knew what she was thinking. How dare this guy make a move on Lady Xue Jie? Don't talk nonsense. Didn't you see that Lady Xue Ji didn't get angry? Maybe they already knew each other. Lady Xue Ji is a famous ice goddess. In my opinion, these two people might be lovers. Do you want to die? If these words were heard by Lord Mingyi of the Heavenly Team, he would definitely teach you a lesson. In Group 8's resting area, all sorts of discussions could be heard. The group leaders all focused their gazes on Yi Xian. Everyone looked at Yi Xian with different gazes. White Wolf snorted coldly, "This brat has guts. He actually dared to provoke Xue Jie. It seems that Mingyi won't let him off even without us making a move. Interesting. It seems that this annual meeting will be very interesting." Tian Yu took a deep look at Yi Xian as a strange look flashed across his eyes. In the Heavenly Team's resting area, Mingye's face was gloomy. He looked at Yi Xian with great hostility. In the Earth Team's resting area, when Yi Xian returned, Azure Dragon's face was filled with bitterness. He didn't know what to say to Yi Xian. "Mr. Yi, what are you?" Azure Dragon finally asked. "This Xue Jie is very interesting. It seems that this world isn't that boring. Don't you think so, Azure Dragon?" Ha! Yi Xian smiled mysteriously, causing Azure Dragon to be confused. He didn't know what Yi Xian was talking about. Clang! The sound of gongs and drums resounded throughout the venue, causing everyone to retract their gazes from Yi Xian and look at the center of the venue. A high platform rose from the center of the venue. The Secretary of Martial Security was dressed in formal attire. He first bowed to the guests from all directions, then slowly recited the opening speech. Boring and long-winded. This was Yi Xian's feeling. The opening speech of the Secretary of Martial Security lasted for more than 20 minutes. It was nothing more than the past year, the results of the Martial Security Department, and the encouragement of the members of each group. Perhaps sensing the impatience of the crowd, the Secretary of Martial Security smiled and directly announced the start of the martial arts competition. Only then did the venue become noisy. Group 1, Zhang Meng of Group Yellow versus He Huan of Group Black. Please come to the stage to compete. When the referee's voice sounded, the two groups of contestants quickly went up the stage. The two fighters on the stage were locked in a fierce battle, which attracted cheers from all directions. At this moment, Yi Xian lazily leaned back in his chair and looked at the competition below in boredom. To Yi Xian, these two people's martial arts were like children playing around. How could they arouse his interest? Group Black wins. When the first match ended and the referee announced the result, White Wolf's face was filled with pride. He even laughed loudly at Yi Xian. "Guest Elder Yi, if the members of our two groups meet, I will definitely instruct them to show mercy. However, when the time comes for you to go on stage, don't embarrass the Earth group." Ha! White Wolf's provocative actions caused Azure Dragon's face to darken, and it even caused the members of the other groups to burst into laughter. It was obvious that the Earth Group's ranking every year was obvious to all, and although Yi Xian's reputation was great, no one had seen him fight before. Naturally, no one thought highly of Yi Xian. Group 2, Earth Group Zhang Xiaochang vs Heaven Group Li Fenglan. When the referee's voice sounded, Zhang Xiaochang's face was pale, and he looked uneasy. It was obvious that this was his first time participating in such a grand event. How could he not be nervous? As a man, you can lose, but you can't cry. Fight with all your might and prove yourself. When Zhang Xiaochang nervously entered the arena, Yi Xian's voice sounded out at the right time. Mr. Yi, I won't let you down. Zhang Xiaochang's face froze, then he clenched his fists tightly, a determined look in his eyes, and strode towards the stage. On the stage, Li Fenglan was a young woman. Although she was not very good-looking, she gave off a heroic aura. Her cultivation was also at the strength transformation stage, but when she found out that her opponent was Zhang Xiaochang of the Earth Group, her originally excited emotions gradually cooled down. There was no other reason. The Earth Group was weak to begin with, and Zhang Xiaochang was famous for being trash. Competing with such a person was just a formality, and even if she won, she would not feel the slightest bit proud. Are you going to admit defeat, or do you want me to throw you off the stage? Li Fenglan said coldly. Mr. Yi once taught me that as a man, I will not lower my head to a woman. Either you kill me today, or I will not admit defeat. Zhang Xiaochang's face was red, but he still roared out loud. Mr. Yi. That Mr. Yi who relied on his connections to become a guest of the Earth Group. What kind of good things can a person like him teach you? Li Fenglan sneered, the contempt in her eyes becoming even stronger. You're not allowed to slander Mr. Yi. Zhang Xiaochang's face flushed red. He was like a crazed beast as he directly attacked Li Fenglan. Chapter 82. Bang! When the fist and palm collided, Li Fenglan did not seem to make any movements. She only turned her body slightly, and when she struck out with her palm, she directly sent Zhang Xiaochang flying, causing Zhang Xiaochang's body to crash into the stage. You're really weak. Is this the result of Mr. Ye's teachings? Li Fenglan sneered, then looked at the referee and said, he's not my match at all. I request for someone else to do it again. Ha! When this scene appeared, a large amount of mocking laughter came from the venue. In the Earth Group's resting area, the Azure Dragon's expression was extremely ugly. On the other hand, Yi Xian's face was expressionless. He had a leisurely look on his face, as if he did not care about the ridicule at all. Xiaochang, how did I teach you? Suddenly, Yi Xian's calm voice sounded in the venue, directly suppressing all the mocking laughter. When such a thing happened, everyone was stunned, and the laughter in their mouths stopped abruptly. Swallowing thunder sound? Looks like I underestimated him. The leader of the Heaven Group, Ming Yi, said in a deep voice. He looked at Yi Xian with a gloomy expression. Not only Ming Yi, but the other group leaders were all people with high cultivations. Just a single word from Yi Xian was enough to suppress the laughter in the entire arena. It was obvious that this Earth Group guest Elder Yi was not an ordinary person. On the stage, a stream of blood continuously flowed out from the corner of Zhang Xiaochang's mouth. Under the astonished gazes of the entire arena, Zhang Xiaochang's arms supported himself on the ground, and he finally stood up slowly. His pair of bright eyes seemed to be glowing, giving off an extremely unyielding feeling. What a strong fighting spirit! The leader of the Universe Group said with shining eyes. The feet are the root of the earth, the body must be as immovable as a mountain, the spine must be like a dragon, the blood energy must be like the ocean, the belt must be the hip must be the arm must be the fist, the blood energy must be condensed into one point, and when a punch is thrown out, one must have the belief of invincibility. The feet are the root of the earth, the body must be as immovable as a mountain. Zhang Xiaochang's mouth continuously made murmuring sounds, as if he had fallen into an unknown state, causing everyone to look at him in surprise. What are you talking about? You've already lost, and you still want to embarrass yourself here? Do you want me to personally throw you down? Li Fenglan frowned slightly and said in a dissatisfied voice. Fight. All of a sudden, Zhang Shaochang suddenly raised his head, and when his eyes opened and closed, a bright light appeared. A thunderous roar came out of his mouth, and the blood qi in his body surged like a vast ocean, gathering towards his right fist. Boom! Zhang Shaochang punched out like a meteor, and the air exploded. Zhang Shaochang instantly appeared in front of Li Fenglan, and under Li Fenglan's shocked gaze, he quickly raised his palm and collided with Zhang Shaochang's. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Li Fenglan's palm was twisted irregularly, and a painful cry came from Li Fenglan's mouth. However, this was not the end. Zhang Shaochang's fist did not slow down and violently bombarded Li Fenglan's chest. Immediately, her sternum caved in, and a large amount of blood spurted out from her mouth. She flew back over 10 meters and instantly fell out of the arena. She fell unconscious. Fenglan. Mingyi let out a low growl. When he leaped, he instantly appeared beside Li Fenglan and quickly fed her a medicinal pill. Then, he checked her pulse, and his expression gradually darkened. What a ruthless method. You actually crippled her cultivation. Mingyi suddenly raised his head and looked angrily at Zhang Shaochang in the arena. A terrifying murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and he strode toward the arena. Buzz! A cool breeze blew, and Yi Xian strangely appeared beside Zhang Shaochang. He looked at Mingyi indifferently and said, What do you want to do? Since you hurt my beloved disciple, I naturally have to use his life to pay for it. Mingyi's murderous intent was cold as he looked directly at Yi Xian. You? Yi Xian smiled slightly, then hooked his finger at Mingyi and said, If you can hurt a single hair on his head, I'll consider it my loss. Arrogance, arrogance, and disregard. This was the attitude that Yi Xian displayed. Although Zhang Shaochang was not his disciple, this did not mean that Yi Xian could let Mingyi hurt him. When this scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, there was an uproar. They looked at Yi Xian with surprise in their eyes. Just how bold was this Earth Group guest elder? Did he not know that Mingyi was the leader of the Heaven Group and was at the peak of the Grandmaster stage? He was only one step away from stepping into the innate stage. Brat, no one has ever dared to speak to me like that. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Mingyi strode onto the arena. The aura around him buzzed, as if a great battle was about to break out between the two of them. Mingyi, you don't have the qualifications to fight with Mr. Yi. You have to pass through me, the Azure Dragon. The Azure Dragon strode over and directly faced Mingyi. An extremely ruthless look appeared in his eyes. Azure Dragon, you've lost to me. This is none of your business. I advise you not to interfere. Mingyi was already dissatisfied with Yi Xian for flirting with Xueji. Now that Zhang Shaochang had crippled Li Fenglan's cultivation, how could he tolerate this? Humph! Suddenly, a cold snort was heard. An old man in his 60s flew over from the Heaven Group's resting area. His cultivation was also at the peak of the Grandmaster stage. He stood beside Mingyi and looked coldly at the Azure Dragon. Lord Azure Dragon, it seems that you have forgotten about this old man. Yunshanhe. The Azure Dragon's expression was complicated because this person was a guest elder of the Heaven Group. His cultivation was only on par with Mingyi's. Swords were drawn and bows were on the verge of breaking out. Such a scene immediately caused the atmosphere of the entire assembly to become heavy. When White Wolf and the others saw this scene, their eyes were filled with schadenfreude. Stop! Before the two sides could make a move, the secretary of Wu and strode over with an extremely gloomy expression on his face. As the secretary of Wu and, although he only had a nominal position and the team leader of Group 8 did not take him seriously, he was still the nominal head of the Wu and department. Moreover, he was also the one presiding over this assembly. If something really went wrong, he would be the first to bear the brunt of the blame when the higher-ups blamed him. Although the secretary of Wu and had an extremely bad impression of Yi Xian, if the two sides really clashed, as the secretary of Wu and, he would not be able to absolve himself from the blame. This is the Wu and department's annual meeting. It's not a place for you to settle your grudges. If you really want to make a move, then wait until the team leader's guest elder sparred. You can give it your all, the secretary of Wu and said sternly. Humph. Ming Ye's eyes were cold as he said coldly, Yi Xian, guest elder Yi, you should be glad that this is the headquarters of the Wu and department. I won't argue with you now, but when we meet later, I hope your fate won't be too miserable. Let's go. Ming Yi called out to Yun Shanhe and turned to walk towards the heaven group to rest. You really don't know your own limits. Yi Xian smiled indifferently, but it caused the azure dragon beside him to feel a chill in his heart. He knew that Yi Xian might have the intention to kill him. He was afraid that the Wu and department's annual meeting this time would undergo a huge change because of Yi Xian. Chapter 83. Yi. Mr. Yi. Zhang Shaochang said in a slightly uneasy manner. Yi Xian patted Zhang Shaochang's shoulder and said, have a good competition. Don't think too much about other things. After comforting Zhang Shaochang, Yi Xian and the Azure Dragon also returned to the Earth Group's resting area. Mr. Yi, no matter what, Ming Yi and the others are all members of the Wuan department. When the time comes, please show mercy. Others might not know Yi Xian's strength, but how could the Azure Dragon not know? After hesitating for a long time, he still tried to persuade Yi Xian. Looking at the worried expression on the Azure Dragon's face, Yi Xian's eyes revealed disappointment. He said in a low voice, Azure Dragon, do you know why the Earth Group is so weak and even allowed White Wolf Ming Yi and the others to bully us? Yi Xian's words caused the Azure Dragon to be startled. After hesitating for a long time, he smiled bitterly and said, the overall cultivation of the Earth Group is not high. In the past few years, in the martial arts competition, without waiting for the Azure Dragon to finish speaking, Yi Xian waved his hand and interrupted him. His voice was solemn as he said, you're wrong. Cultivation is only one aspect. The real reason why they don't put the Earth Group in their eyes is because of you. Me? The Azure Dragon was stunned. That's right, it's because of you. Yi Xian looked straight at the Azure Dragon and continued, you are always thinking about the big picture, and your style of doing things is slightly indecisive. In the eyes of outsiders, this is a kind of weak behavior. As the saying goes, the soldiers bear one, and the generals bear a nest. Today, the members of the Heaven team were injured. As the team leader, Ming Yi ignored the rules of the assembly and went on stage to avenge his team members. In your opinion, this is against the rules. But in the eyes of the members of the Heaven team, Ming Yi is standing up for them. How can they not fight for Ming Yi? Whether it's the art of controlling people or the Brotherhood, you can look at the members of the Heaven group now. Perhaps you will discover something. When Yi Xian said this, he did not say anything else. Azure Dragon suddenly looked at the resting area of the heavenly team. When he saw the admiration and reverence in the eyes of the members of the heavenly team towards Ming Yi, Azure Dragon was completely stunned. He also seemed to understand something. The top and bottom are united and in the same boat. Even if your cultivation is not Ming Ye's match, if you act domineeringly and do not give in at all, leading the Earth Group with an iron-blooded attitude, the Earth Group will definitely not be like this. Yi Xian's words were very straightforward, so straightforward that Azure Dragon felt ashamed. However, it was the truth that Yi Xian had to say. From the moment Yi Xian entered the Wuan Agency headquarters, he had noticed this problem. The Black Team's White Wolf had bullied him, and the Heaven Team's Dark Knight did not put Azure Dragon in his eyes. All of this proved that there was a huge problem with Azure Dragon's way of doing things. From Yi Xian's point of view, Qing Long wasn't a weakling. He was just concerned about the overall situation of the Wuan Agency and didn't want to cause trouble. He was also a man of steel. However, it was precisely because of his actions that the Earth group had fallen to such a state. Why didn't the Earth group have a guest elder for 10 years? In fact, the reason was very simple. It was because Azure Dragon was afraid of everything. How could a true expert be willing to work with him? Even if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up. It's not your turn to worry. Just like the Wuan agency, you're only the leader of Group 1, but you have to worry about the matters of Group 8. Why do you have to do this? Yi Xian said softly. Mr. Yi, I understand. After breaking through the cocoon and transforming into a butterfly, Azure Dragon clenched his fists tightly after hearing Yi Xian's words. His state of mind also underwent a tremendous change at this moment. A kind person was bullied, and a good horse was ridden. This saying had been passed down to this day, and it was not without reason. Azure Dragon also understood the meaning of this sentence. It was just that he had always been in the situation, and it was only now that he was enlightened by Yi Xian. Looking at the fighting spirit in Azure Dragon's eyes, Yi Xian slowly nodded, and then did not say anything else. Yi Xian had always believed in one principle: the strong would always be strong, and the weak would always be like dogs. Just like in real life, there would always be some people who would take a step back and take a step forward until they could no longer retreat and fell into a bottomless abyss. Only then would they suddenly wake up, but by the time they woke up, it was already too late. The meeting continued, and the members of the various groups went on stage one after another. Half a day passed very quickly. Zhang Shaocheng advanced triumphantly all the way, and all his opponents fell under his feet. Until he met with the members of the Xian group, he even heavily injured them, causing the members of the Earth group to cheer loudly. The White Wolf's face was extremely gloomy, no longer having the complacent look from before. However, his vicious eyes would occasionally look at Yi Xian, and a malicious killing intent would appear in his eyes. This year's martial arts competition champion, Zhang Shaocheng of the Earth group. Zhang Shaocheng excitedly held a trophy and quickly came in front of Yi Xian, saying excitedly, "Mr. Yi, I won, I really won, I did not let you down." "You did well." Yi Xian nodded and smiled. Wang! The air exploded as he flew up. Just as the head of Wuan announced the result, Ming Yi and Yun Shanhe directly stepped onto the stage. Their gazes towards Yi Xian and the Azure Dragon were even more gloomy. "Secretary, I don't think there's any need for formalities. Since it's a spar between guest team leaders, then my Heaven Squad will take the lead," Ming Yi said coldly. The Wuan secretary smiled flatteringly and walked down the stage. It was obvious that what happened next was not something he could control. "Interesting, my Xian group will join in as well." The White Wolf and the Xian group's guest elders leaped onto the stage and looked towards Yi Xian and the Azure Dragon. Bang! The Azure Dragon slammed the table and stood up, about to step onto the stage, but before he could do anything, Yi Xian pushed him back to his seat and said, "They are here for me, this has nothing to do with you." The wind was light and the clouds were untainted by dust. Yi Xian slowly stepped onto the stage and looked straight at the four people in front of him. His face was expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. "Brother Ming Yi, this person has some grudges with me. How about you leave him to me?" The White Wolf laughed sinisterly. "Hurting my beloved disciple, I must personally cripple his cultivation," Ming Yi said coldly. "We don't want to hurt each other. Why don't we let this guest Yi personally choose his opponent?" Yun Shanhe twirled his beard and smiled, not putting Yi Xian in his eyes at all. At this moment, whether it was the guests from the 8 directions or the people from the 8 groups, all of them cast their gazes towards the stage. When they saw the hostility the 4 ancient martial grandmasters emitted towards Yi Xian, some of them couldn't help but wipe away cold sweat for Yi Xian. "Master Azure Dragon, Mr. Yi is alone. How can he be a match for them?" "You." A member of the Earth group wanted to say something but stopped. "Don't worry, they can't be a match for Mr. Yi. Just watch." The azure dragon laughed coldly, but it fell into the ears of the people of Group 8. This also caused them to be stunned. They looked at Yi Xian on the stage and were all surprised. On the stage, Yi Xian had his hands behind his back and looked at the 4 people in front of him indifferently. Their argument was very funny to Yi Xian. There's no need to argue. All of you can come together. After all, when you step onto the stage, you're already dead. Yi Xian said indifferently. Chapter 84. Yi Xian's attitude caused the entire arena to go into an uproar. The expressions of the 4 people on the stage were extremely unsightly, and the white wolf's eyes emitted a fierce light. Without waiting for the other 3 to react, the ice attribute ability within its body suddenly erupted and directly shot towards Yi Xian. The cold light was cold and the killing intent was overwhelming. Icicles filled the sky as they formed in the air. With an explosive sound that pierced through the air, they all shot towards Yi Xian. This also caused the other 3 to slightly retreat, giving way to the 2 of them. After all, if the 4 of them really joined forces to attack, not only would the guests despise them, even they themselves would not be able to get through. This was also their pride as ancient martial arts masters. Yi Xian, you have to pay the price for your arrogance. Although I won't kill you today, I will let you end up with your cultivation crippled. White Wolf's face was ferocious and the cold air around him was extremely terrifying. As he waved his palms, a large number of ice cones had already drowned Yi Xian. Boom! The clear sky exploded and the void was trapped. Yi Xian didn't seem to have made any movements. He merely waved his hand in the air and the icicles that filled the sky instantly shattered into mist. The scene that followed caused the surrounding guests to become deathly silent. A slender and lonely figure suddenly walked out of the icy mist. A jade-like palm kept enlarging in the white wolf's eyes. He wanted to dodge the palm with all his might, but his body seemed to be fixed in place. At this moment, he couldn't move at all. Ugh! White Wolf groaned and his face was full of horror. His eyes were wide open and he could not believe that Yi Xian had grabbed him by the neck and lifted him into the air. An extremely terrifying force was exerted on his throat. Crack! 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 A strange sound came from his throat. Yi Xian's palm was slightly tightening. White Wolf's neck was twisted irregularly and his face turned from red to purple. An extremely terrifying suffocating feeling invaded his body. It was as if he would be crushed to death by Yi Xian in the next moment. Do you still remember what I told you before? Yi Xian said calmly. No. Impossible. How can you be this so strong? With Yi Xian choking his neck, White Wolf found it extremely difficult to breathe. He struggled to make a sound, and there was an indescribable fear in his eyes. White Wolf was not the only one who was terrified. At this time, everyone present suddenly stood up and looked at Yi Xian with eyes full of horror. They could not believe what they were seeing. No. Impossible. Even though the White Wolf is slightly weaker than me. Why can't it even take a single move from him? Ming Yi said with a trembling voice. He stared fixedly at Yi Xian in the arena, and an extremely complicated expression appeared in his eyes. Ming Yi was not the only one who had this question. Everyone present had the same thought. Even though White Wolf was no match for Yi Xian, wasn't this defeat a little too simple? Could it be that his cultivation is Xiantian? Yun Shanha's voice trembled as he said a fact that everyone had already thought of. Impossible, absolutely impossible. I, Ming Yi, have been practicing ancient martial arts for 30 years and have only just touched the threshold of the Xiantian realm. This person is only around 20 years old. How can he be a Xiantian realm martial artist? Ming Yi roared and refuted. It was obvious that he could not accept this fact. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. When the words Xiantian Realm Martial Artist rang out, the entire venue was filled with a huge commotion. A Xiantian Realm Martial Artist. I didn't expect this Yi Xian to be a Xiantian Realm Martial Artist. It can't be wrong. Other than a Xiantian Realm Martial Artist, who else can defeat an ancient martial arts grandmaster in one move? It's been 100 years, a full 100 years. I didn't expect that a Xiantian Realm martial artist would appear in China again. The crowd was in an uproar. At this moment, the competition was no longer important in the eyes of the various guests. However, the matter of Yi Xian being a Xiantian Realm martial artist caused a huge sensation. It was no wonder that the guests were so shocked. Xiantian Realm martial artists were a legend. They were also known as humanoid war machines. They were extraordinary and were not bound by the rules of the world. They were existences that could fight against tens of thousands of troops. In the arena, Bai Lang's face was ashen, and his eyes were filled with regret. If he had known that Yi Xian was a Xiantian martial artist, how could he have provoked him? Yi. Mr. Yi. I admit defeat. The White Wolf said in a trembling voice, and there was a hint of pleading in his voice. Unfortunately, Yi Xian's expression was indifferent. When his eyes opened and closed, there was only coldness and emotionlessness. I told you before that you would die a terrible death. Have you forgotten? Yi Xian seemed to be talking about something very casual, but it made White Wolf's eyes fill with fear. Yi. Mr. Yi. You're a guest of the Earth Group. You can't kill me. I'm the leader of the Xian Group. If you kill me. Ah! White Wolf cried out in pain as he pointed his sword at the sky. Yi Xian chopped off one of his bloody arms. I've always been a man of my word. If I say that I'll make you die a terrible death, then I'll definitely make you die a terrible death. Yi Xian said calmly, but his actions caused the people of Group 8 to fall silent. They looked at Yi Xian with fear in their eyes. Fiendish, vicious, and merciless. This was the attitude that Yi Xian displayed in front of them. At this moment, the people of Group 8 finally realized a fact. In Mr. Ye's eyes, there was no such thing as mercy. Anyone who offended him would become a dead man. Yi Xian, you bastard. If you kill me, there will be no place for you in the Wuan department. White Wolf could tell from Yi Xian's eyes that the other party had no intention of letting him go, so he directly cursed at him. Chi! Blood splattered across the sky as screams rang out. As White Wolf cursed in pain, his limbs were cut off one by Yi Xian. His right palm suddenly exerted force and broke White Wolf's neck. He casually threw White Wolf's corpse on the ground like trash. Silence, silence, dead silence. In the arena. With broken limbs, White Wolf's corpse twitched non-stop. A strong smell of blood drifted out, making Yi Xian look like a demon. Group leader. Lord White Wolf. Cries and roars came from the mouths of the members of the Xian group. They glared at Yi Xian and wanted to take revenge for the White Wolf. However, when they saw Yi Xian's merciless eyes, their bodies immediately shivered and their voices became inaudible. Yi Xian, how dare you kill the leader of the Xian group? Ming Yi roared, but he kept a distance from Yi Xian. Obviously, when he knew that Yi Xian was a Xiantian warrior, he had no intention of fighting with him. Tap, tap, tap. It was as if the war drums of death were beating, as if a soul-burying lament was being played. Yi Xian slowly walked towards Ming Yi and the other two. His expression was unperturbed, but the expressions of the three of them greatly changed, and they continuously retreated. Yi Xian. You. What do you want to do? Do you want to kill us? Ming Yi was fierce on the outside, and he was no longer arrogant on the inside. I am a very simple person. Anyone who offends me is a dead man. There has never been an exception. Like the god of the underworld, like the king of hell, Yi Xian's voice was very calm, but it made everyone present shudder. A feeling of death appeared in everyone's mind. Chapter 85. The whole place was silent, and the atmosphere was heavy. As far as everyone knew, when a primordial realm warrior wanted to kill someone, no one could stop him. Unless there was a warrior of the primordial realm, Minji and the other two would die without a doubt. However, was Yi Xian really a primordial realm warrior? He was a cultivator, and a cultivator of the crossing calamity realm. He was called the Immortal Heavenly Lord by millions of creatures. Although this world was in the age of chaos and spiritual qi did not exist in the world, and Yi Xian could not mobilize the power of heaven and earth to display the truly terrifying means of a cultivator, in terms of life level, the existence of a cultivator surpassed that of mortals. In this world, who could stop him? Minji was very afraid. He was really afraid. He slowly retreated because he could see from Yi Xian's eyes that the other party really wanted to kill him and had no scruples. Die! The air exploded as a bloody light shot out. Yi Xian took a step forward and suddenly appeared in front of Ming Yi and the other two. Without waiting for the three of them to react, a biting cold sword qi directly slashed down towards the three of them. Fight with him! Minji trembled and roared. He gathered all the strength in his body and violently slapped at Yi Xian. The other two also knew that life and death were in front of them, so they could only fight with their lives on the line. Puchi! Blood appeared and cut at the waist. The two guests did not even have the strength to fight back. They were directly cut in two by Yi Xian. The bloody corpses made people feel even more horrified at a glance. Ah! My legs! Minji screamed miserably. His legs were cut off by Yi Xian. His whole body crawled on the ground. A large amount of blood flowed out from his broken legs. His extremely miserable appearance made the onlookers unable to bear to look directly at him. Mortals are really fragile. Let me send you on your last journey. Yi Xian slowly shook his head. His sparkling and translucent jade-like palm was blooming with a hazy blood light, as if he would kill Minji in the next moment. Enough! Suddenly, at this critical moment, a cold shout was heard. A slender figure floated into the field and directly blocked in front of Yi Xian. Lord! Lord Tianyu! When this person appeared, the members of Group 8 were in an uproar. Mr. Yi, you've already killed 3 people. It's time to stop. The U Group's Tianyu was the most mysterious person in the Martial Security Department. Not only was he the leader of the U Group, but there were also rumors that Tianyu might have already stepped into the Xiantian realm. However, this rumor had never been confirmed. Whoosh! Numerous figures flew over and stood behind Tianyu. They were the various group leaders and guest elders. Clearly, if they did not intervene at this time, the Wuanan agency would face a huge problem. Mr. Yi, no matter what, you are still a guest of the Earth Group. Why don't you let Ming Yi live? The leader of the Zhou Group was an old man. He advised Yi Xian with kind words. Killing 3 was killing, killing 4 was also killing. Yi Xian admitted that he was not a bloodthirsty person. However, killing people was a very effective method that could save him a lot of trouble. Although Ming Ye's legs had already been cut off and he was only a cripple from now on, if it was someone else, they might really plead for mercy in front of everyone. However, with Yi Xian, if he wanted to kill someone, he had to die. No one could go against his will. Boom! The void exploded as a palm struck out. Tianyu and the others were caught off guard. Yi Xian's palm struck Ming Ye's head, causing him to bleed from all 7 orifices. He turned into a cold corpse and fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open before he died, proving how much he died with grievances. Dead silence. The atmosphere was heavy. When Ming Yi died tragically in front of Tianyu and the others, their faces were extremely ugly. After a dozen breaths, Tianyu looked straight at Yi Xian. A wisp of anger appeared in his eyes as he slowly walked towards Yi Xian. Mr. Yi, although you are a Xiantian martial artist, you have gone too far. Xiantian earth energy gushed out, causing the void to explode incessantly. Biting cold earth energy swirled around Tian Yu as an extremely terrifying aura erupted from his body. Xiantian. Xiantian martial artist? Lord Tian Yu is indeed a Xiantian martial artist. When Tian Yu revealed his true strength, it immediately attracted the exclamations of countless people. Everyone's gazes were focused on Yi Xian and Tian Yu. It was obvious that a confrontation between two Xiantian martial artists was something that had never happened in many years. Lord Tian Yu, Azure Dragon will take responsibility for this matter. I will report it to the higher-ups. Azure Dragon's expression changed when he saw Tian Yu's strength. Azure Dragon, you may have forgotten. Although the Wuan Agency is divided into 8 groups, my Yu group is in charge of punishment. Honored guest Ye's killing intent is too strong, so I can only imprison him in the warden's office and make a decision later, Tian Yu said coldly. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at Tian Yu with a playful gaze. His expression didn't change in the slightest as he said, "You're not bad. To be able to step into Qi refinement at your age. No, according to what you guys said, you should be at the first level of the Xiantian realm." Yi Xian paused for a moment, and then his voice became strange. But do you really think that you are a match for me? Whether I am a match for you or not, we will only know after we try. Don't you think so? Tian Yu said coldly, his body radiating with strong confidence. The battle between two Xiantian martial artists was about to break out, and it attracted the attention of all the guests. But at this moment, a loud noise came from the entrance of the venue, and all the guests looked towards the source of the noise. At the entrance of the venue, more than 10 ancient martial artists were clearing the way in front. Nangong Tian was leading the way respectfully. Behind him, Li Huantian's white robe was fluttering even though there was no wind. With every step he took, the sword qi around him buzzed, and 3 lotus flowers loomed above his head. With his hands behind his back, Li Huantian looked at Yi Xian and Tian Yu indifferently. When Li Huantian arrived at the arena, he looked directly at Yi Xian and Tian Yu. It was as if he was looking at 2 juniors. Time is like a song, and in the blink of an eye, 100 years have passed, and there are still Xiantian martial artists in the mortal world. It seems that the martial arts lineage hasn't declined yet. You're not bad, Li Huantian said, looking at Yi Xian and Tian Yu with admiration. Hey, who are you, old man? Who are you to speak here? Some guests were unhappy that Li Huantian had interrupted the battle between the two and yelled at him. Noisy. Li Huantian pointed his sword at Flowing Cloud, and the void shook. He didn't do anything, but the flying snow sword on his back suddenly came out of its sheath. A cold light flashed across the venue, and the guests couldn't open their eyes. They saw that the man who had yelled at Li Huantian had been beheaded, and his body fell to the ground. Hiss! The crowd was in an uproar, and they gasped. Li Huantian's move silenced the crowd, and they looked at Li Huantian with horror. Senior, may I know your name? Chapter 86. In the arena, Tian Yu's face was solemn because he felt an extremely heavy pressure from Li Huantian. It was as if his opponent was a mountain that he had to look up to. Even his breathing was a little hurried at this moment. You're practicing the Northern Frost True skill. Who is Kahan Taoist to you? Li Huantian asked seriously. Hearing Li Huantian mention Beihan Taoist, Tian Yu's face changed. Beihan Taoist was his teacher and he practiced the Northern Frost True skill. No one knew who his teacher was. How could Tian Yu not be shocked and this mysterious man mentioned it? Beihan Taoist is my teacher. He passed away 20 years ago. May I know who you are? Tian Yu asked cautiously. The heavenly Tao has no end. He turned into a skeleton. I didn't expect him to die so early. Li Huantian slowly shook his head. His voice sounded even more ancient, but when Tian Yu heard it, he was startled. He already had some guesses in his heart. My name is Li Huantian. Have you heard your teacher mention me? Li Huantian woke up from his thoughts and stared at Tianyu. Tianyu was stunned and his body trembled uncontrollably. After a full 10 breaths of time. Under the shocked eyes of all the guests, Tianyu knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Li Huantian. I'm Lin Tianyu, the 18th generation disciple of the Northern Frost sect. It's an honor to meet you, Senior Peerless Sword Immortal. Peerless Sword Immortal. Who is the Peerless Sword Immortal? There was a lot of discussion in the venue. Li Huantian became the only focus of attention at this moment. This mysterious man could make Tianyu, a Khanate martial artist, kneel down and kowtow to him. His background was simply unimaginable. I remember. 100 years ago, a peerless sword immortal appeared. He was known as the 9th master in the world. With the flying snow sword in his hand, countless Khanate martial artists were defeated by him. He was also known as the Peerless Sword Immortal in the ancient martial world. The leader of the Ian group was an old man in his 60s. Although he did not live in that era, he had heard a lot about the people from 100 years ago. He looked at Li Huantian with a burning gaze. Could it be? Could it be that you're really Senior Li Huantian? The leader of the Ian group trembled as he asked. I didn't expect that after 100 years, there would still be people who remember me, Li Huantian said calmly. As Li Huantian acknowledged his identity, the Ian group leader hurriedly knelt down. This scene instantly made everyone present aware of Li Huantian's identity. A large number of ancient martial ability users looked excited as they knelt down before him and continuously shouted his name. It was no wonder that these ancient martial ability users would make such a move. 100 years ago, Li Huantian was the 9th most powerful expert in the world. In that distant era, he was known as the Peerless Sword Immortal. 100 years later, how terrifying would Li Huantian's cultivation be? However, while everyone was bowing to Li Huantian, Yi Xian was the only one standing in the arena. He looked at Li Huantian with a hint of contempt in his eyes. The 5th level of Qi refining. Interesting, Yi Xian murmured. He could see through Li Huantian's cultivation at a glance. Yi Xian, why don't you greet Senior Li Huantian? All of a sudden. Nangong Tian directly scolded Yi Xian and targeted Yi Xian. At this moment, Li Huantian also looked at Yi Xian. However, his brows slightly furrowed because he discovered something extremely shocking. He actually couldn't see through Yi Xian's cultivation. This kind of strange thing was something that had never happened before. There were only 2 kinds of people who could make Li Huantian unable to see through their cultivation. The first kind was ordinary people. This kind of people did not practice ancient martial arts, so their essence would not leak out. It was natural that Li Huantian could not see through their cultivation. The second kind was people whose cultivation was much higher than Li Huantian's. Li Huantian had only seen 2 people like this in his life, and these 2 people were also his targets. However, the third kind had now appeared. Li Huantian could not see through this young man in the arena at all. However, it was impossible for him to be an ordinary person. Otherwise, how could he appear in the arena? However, Li Huantian did not believe that Yi Xian's cultivation was much higher than his. Even if Yi Xian started cultivating in his mother's womb, it would only be 20 years at most. How could Yi Xian be his opponent? Young man, you're very interesting. You can actually restrain your cultivation. I wonder who your master is. Li Huantian looked down at Yi Xian and asked. Unfortunately, Yi Xian ignored Li Huantian's question. This scene made Li Huantian's expression change slightly. He looked at Yi Xian with dissatisfaction. Junior, you should know that although I was very arrogant when I was your age, I was still in awe of the seniors. Only by being in awe can you live a long life. Li Huantian spoke as if he was giving advice to the world. Mr. Yi Xian, you can't offend this person. Green Dragon reminded him softly. He was afraid that Li Huantian would be unhappy with Yi Xian. You're only at Xiantian realm level 5. How dare you criticize me? Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed. How could he not be amused by being reprimanded by an ant? Dong! 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 The void vibrated. Li Huantian stepped into the air and narrowed his eyes. 3 lotus flowers floated above his head as he strolled towards Yi Xian. Every step he took caused ripples to appear under his feet. 3 flowers at once prominence and imperial qi levitation. Tian Yu cried out in alarm when he saw Li Huantian's technique. Although he had just entered the Xiantian realm and could not reach Li Huantian's level, how could he not see how terrifying Li Huantian's cultivation was? Humph. Pretentious. Yi Xian snorted coldly. When he opened and closed his eyes, a blood-red light flashed. He took a step forward and endless explosions came from all directions. Under everyone's shocked gazes, Yi Xian rose from the ground and faced Li Huantian. How is this possible? Li Huantian's technique had already made Tian Yu regard him as a god. However, when Yi Xian also displayed his imperial qi levitation technique, Tian Yu felt as if he had fallen into a dream. He did not expect Yi Xian to be so strong. It seemed like he had the strength to rival Li Huantian. Not only was Tian Yu's expression wooden, the entire venue had also become deathly silent. It was all because the cultivation that Yi Xian was gradually revealing was simply too shocking. At this moment, Li Huantian frowned as he looked at Yi Xian with a solemn expression. He never thought that a junior would have such a tyrannical cultivation when he returned to the mortal world. A person's cultivation was formed through the accumulation of time. However, this was not absolute. There were always people in this world who were unparalleled and talented. Their cultivation could not be judged by their age. Obviously, in Li Huantian's eyes, Yi Xian was such a person. Li Huantian was envious, jealous, and extremely unwilling. He asked himself, if I had Yi Xian's unparalleled talent, I wouldn't have wasted 100 years. I would have broken through the Xiantian 9th stage and stepped into the legendary Earth Immortal realm. A person's jealousy was very terrible. Although Li Huantian was a god in everyone's eyes, he was only a human after all. Humans could not avoid the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Therefore, when he looked at Yi Xian, a cold killing intent gradually emerged in his eyes. I really didn't expect that a monstrous genius like you would appear in this world after 100 years of seclusion. If you were given more time, wouldn't you have stepped into the Earth Immortal realm? Li Huantian said gloomily, his eyes full of jealousy. Earth Immortal realm? Yi Xian smiled contemptuously and said, it seems that you have some misunderstanding about the word, immortal. Your life level has always been at the level of immortal. Your ignorance really makes me laugh. Junior, you're courting death. Clang! 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 The flying snow sword buzzed and emitted a cold sword light. It floated directly in front of Li Huantian, as if it would attack Yi Xian in the next moment. Come on, let me see how capable you are. Yi Xian's smile was cruel and his voice became more and more playful. Chapter 87. Rumble. When Li Huantian unleashed his cultivation of Xiantian 5th stage, the void trembled and the air exploded. He held the flying snow sword in his hand and pointed the Xiantian sword qi at Yi Xian. Sword 1. The Xiantian sword qi exploded. Li Huantian seemed to have transformed into a peerless immortal sword. When he slashed out, a monstrous sword light shot toward Yi Xian. Sword controlling qi. That's all you got. Yi Xian's expression didn't change in the face of Li Huantian's sword light. A pair of sword fingers tore through the sky, and a blood-red heavenly sword condensed in the air. The blood-red heavenly sword even emitted the miserable screams of ghosts. Slash! Yi Xian uttered a simple word. The blood-red heavenly sword buzzed violently and slashed toward Li Huantian with unparalleled power. Bang! There was a loud noise and the void trembled. When the two forces collided, an extremely terrifying airwave shot out in all directions and instantly submerged the two. Their eardrums buzzed and their vision blurred. No one knew what the result was. After a full 10 breaths, when everyone's vision became clear, they were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. It was as if they had fallen into a dream. In the void, Yi Xian stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking calm. On the other hand, Li Huantian had already fallen to the ground. He held the flying snow sword in his hand and looked uninjured. However, he looked at Yi Xian with a dignified expression. In everyone's imagination, Yi Xian was no match for Li Huantian, the peerless sword celestial from 100 years ago. Perhaps Yi Xian would be turned into a cold corpse by Li Huantian's sword. However, the truth was the opposite. Yi Xian was not dead, but Li Huantian had fallen to the void. How could they not be surprised? "Senior Huantian, are you okay?" Nangong Tian's face was gloomy and he asked cautiously. "Junior, you're not bad. You're good enough to be my opponent. 3 days later, we'll fight on the top of the Forbidden City." After Li Huantian finished speaking, he suddenly turned around and left the venue. Nangong Tian's expression was complicated. He didn't know why Li Huantian wanted to leave, but since his backer had already left, he could only glare fiercely at Yi Xian and quickly follow Li Huantian. In the void, Yi Xian looked at the backs of Li Huantian and Nangong Tian. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a playful smile. He didn't stop the two of them from leaving, and an unfathomable light appeared in his eyes. "Mr. Yi, are you all right?" Azure Dragon asked anxiously. "Do you think something will happen to me?" Yi Xian lightly smiled as he walked down from the sky. At this moment, everyone looked at Yi Xian with respect. Tian Yu and the others had a complicated expression. They did not dare to look into Yi Xian's eyes and quietly returned to their resting area. However, when they looked at Yi Xian from the corner of their eyes, they were filled with fear. Obviously, Yi Xian's ability to block Li Huantian's attack had changed everyone's impression of Yi Xian. Tian Yu had no intention of capturing Yi Xian. He did not mention that Ming Yi and the others had died in Yi Xian's hands. When a person was strong enough to be looked up to, the so-called rules were useless. Tian Yu understood this, so he would not risk his life. If he provoked Yi Xian into killing, wouldn't he die in vain like Ming Yi? Tian Yu would never do such a stupid thing. The annual meeting of the Wuan Bureau ended with a weak ending. However, Yi Xian's reputation spread throughout the upper class of capital city. When the father and son of the Yi family left, they were filled with regret. If they had not chased Yi Xian and his mother out of the family, how glorious would the Yi family be today? However, there was no medicine for regret in this world. The father and son of the Yi family could only leave with regret. Before they left, they instructed a servant to pass a note to Yi Xian. The luxurious car drove slowly on the road towards the Nangong family's villa. In the car, Li Huantian was resting with his eyes closed. Nangong Tian was confused. He could not help but ask, "Senior Huantian, why didn't you kill him just now?" Pfft! All of a sudden. As soon as Nangong Tian finished his sentence, Li Huantian spat out a mouthful of blood, staining the car window red. His rosy face turned pale instantly, and his straight body was trembling slightly. This. Looking at the scene in front of him, Nangong Tian was at a loss for words. He was dumbfounded. What a powerful sword chi! What a hidden junior! This old man's illustrious reputation was almost destroyed by this junior. Li Huantian opened his eyes slowly and wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were filled with viciousness. Senior. Are you no match for him?" Nangong Tian came back to his senses and asked in a trembling voice. "If I'm not wrong, he must be at Xiantian Realm LV6. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been injured by his attack just now." Li Huantian clenched his fists with fear in his eyes. Then, does that mean that the Nangong family will? Hearing Li Huantian's words, Nangong Tian's eyes were filled with despair. If even Li Huantian was no match for Yi Xian, wouldn't the Nangong family be slaughtered by Yi Xian sooner or later? Don't worry. Although his cultivation is slightly higher than mine, I've reached the end of my life. I can burn my essence and blood to have a final battle with him. Even a Xiantian realm LV7 will die under my sword, let alone a Xiantian realm LV6, Li Huantian said gloomily. But senior, if you do that, won't you also? Nangong Tian's eyes were filled with joy, but he still pretended to be concerned about Li Huantian. I have 1 more year to live at most. I've lived long enough. I can't let this junior ruin my reputation before I reach the end of my life, Li Huantian said coldly. If it was said that Li Huantian had only attacked Yi Xian in order to fulfill his promise, then it was completely different now. If he didn't kill Yi Xian, then his reputation would be ruined if word of today's matter spread. It was also because of this reason that before Li Huantian left, he challenged Yi Xian to a battle to the death at the peak of the Forbidden City in 3 days for the sake of his reputation. Even Li Huantian was no exception to the saying that false reputations hurt people. He had only been defeated twice in his life, but both times he was defeated by the most talented people of his generation. If he was defeated by a junior 100 years later, he wouldn't be able to die in peace. Burning his essence and blood to have a final battle with Yi Xian would make the name of the extinctive sword Immortal spread forever. Even if Li Huantian died, he would be able to smile in the underworld. However, was the truth really as simple as Li Huantian thought? Don't tell anyone about what happened today. Find me a quiet place. I'm going to fast and take a bath for 3 days. No matter what happens during these 3 days, don't disturb me, Li Huantian said and closed his eyes to rest again. Yes, Senior Tian, Nangong Tian replied respectfully, but there was a deep look in his eyes. Chapter 88. The Nangong Family. When Nangong Tian saw Li Huantian enter seclusion, he took out his phone and made a call quickly. "Enta, I need your help. If Yi Xian is still alive in 3 days, you can launch an attack directly. The Nangong family will also leave Xia country and cooperate with your organization completely." "Oh, Satan above, you're too crazy. But I like your craziness very much. I welcome the Nangong family on behalf of the organization." A foreign man's voice came from the other end of the phone. If Yi Xian heard this voice, he would definitely remember that this was the voice of the terrorist leader who wanted to blow up the plane. The call ended. The craziness in Nangong Tian's eyes intensified. Seeing Li Huantian injured today made him uneasy, so he made preparations for both sides. Even if Li Huantian couldn't kill Yi Xian in 3 days, the weapon in Enta's hand would definitely be able to make him die without a burial ground. The news of the battle between Li Huantian and Yi Xian spread like wildfire and became the focus of all the upper class in capital city. At the same time, a large number of ancient martial artists appeared in capital city. Some ancient martial artist family representatives even went to the Nangong family to visit Li Huantian, but they were stopped by Nangong Tian. He even told these ancient martial artist family representatives that Li Huantian and Yi Xian would fight on the top of the Forbidden City in 3 days. Capital City, in a nameless courtyard house. Yi Xian unfolded the note in his hand. When he finished reading the contents of the note, a cold murderous intent appeared on his gentle face. It was indeed the Nangong family's doing. Yi Xian said softly. The note was delivered by a servant sent by the father and son of the Yi family. The content of the note was very simple, and the words expressed humility. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that the missile attack on Yi Xian was done by the Nangong family and had nothing to do with the Yi family. They hoped that Yi Xian would visit the Yi family when he was free. In fact, even without the Yi family's letter, Yi Xian had already guessed that the missile attack was done by the Nangong family. Although the Nangong family was one of the 8 dominant families, they should have known about Yi Xian's methods and how important he was to the Xia country's big shots. Logically speaking, the Nangong family wouldn't dare to openly cause trouble for Yi Xian. However, during the annual meeting of the Martial Security Department, Nangong Tian invited Li Huantian to attack him without any scruples. It was obvious that the Nangong family had a guilty conscience and exposed themselves. The Nangong family's Yi Xian and the Nangong family and Yi Xian's plan and Yi Xian's suspicions. Ants families is family. However, now that the Yi family's message had confirmed this matter, Yi Xian was finally certain that this was indeed the doing of the Nangong family. Since the truth had been found out, in Yi Xian's eyes, Li Huantian and the Nangong family were destined to die. That was an unchangeable fact. The only thing that made Yi Xian feel a little relieved was that Yi Ping, who was in Jiangnan City, did not participate in this incident. Hence, the killing intent in his heart disappeared. Although Yi Xian was cruel, overbearing, and ruthless, he was still a human. As a human, he had 7 emotions and 6 desires. If he killed Yi Ping behind Mrs. Ye's back, he could totally imagine how devastated Mrs. Ye would be when she saw Yi Ping's corpse. Kinship was Yi Xian's burden. He also admitted that this burden made him feel as if his hands and feet were tied. However, as a person, there would always be a kind side to him. Yi Xian's kindness was all given to Mother Yi. This was also to repay Mother Ye's kindness for raising him for so many years. The difficult problem was solved, and Yi Xian felt much better physically and mentally at this moment. Azure Dragon, send this note up there and pass it on to the leaders for me. In 3 days, the Nangong family will no longer exist. Yi Xian casually passed the note to Azure Dragon, then turned around and walked towards the house. Qing Long quickly read the contents of the note, and his eyes were full of anger. He quickly left the courtyard and reported the situation to the few big shots of Xia Nation. The few big shots replied very quickly, telling Yi Xian not to have any scruples and that they would always stand behind Yi Xian. At the same time, the secretary of Wu An reported to the few big shots about what Yi Xian had done during the annual meeting of the Wu An department. The team leaders also came forward to testify, but the response that they received made the people of the Wu An department speechless. Yi Xian was the protector of Xia Nation. As long as he did not harm the interests of Xia Nation, there was no need to report to them. After receiving such a reply from the few big shots, the people of the Wu An department finally understood how important Yi Xian was in the hearts of the few big shots. This also made them smile bitterly and sigh. White Wolf and Ming Yi had really died unjustly. However, it was also this matter that sounded the alarm for the people of the Wu An department, making them understand a principle. They absolutely could not offend Yi Xian. If they offended this person, their fate would be extremely miserable. Xue Ji, the leader of the desolate group, was extremely uneasy. She could not forget Yi Xian's strange gaze and the words he had said. How can he tell that I'm a demon? Xue Ji's face was pale as she mumbled to herself. A trace of worry flashed across her eyes. 3 days later. A crescent moon hung in the night sky. Under the starry sky, it gave people a feeling of incomparable beauty. The Forbidden City was the capital of the previous dynasty. Now, it had become a place for tourists from all over the world. However, tonight, the Forbidden City was closed to visitors. The area within a radius of 10 miles was even more heavily guarded. Ordinary people were not allowed to set foot in it. Under the Forbidden City, a large number of ancient martial ability users had gathered here. There were also celebrities and tycoons from all over the world watching from afar. The decisive battle between 2 primordial warriors was a grand event that had not been seen in decades. This battle was destined to be recorded in the history of the ancient martial world, leaving behind a fascinating legend for the future generations. Buzz! The void buzzed and ripples spread out. The sound of an explosion came from afar. Before the people could see clearly who had come, a slender figure had already appeared above the Forbidden City. He was dressed in a moon-white robe, with silver-white hair at his temples. He held the flying snow sword in his arms. Under the moonlight, he gave people a sense of transcendence. 100 years ago, the ninth master in the world was respected by the world as the absolute sword immortal. He was Li Huantian. Greetings, Senior Absolute Sword Immortal. When Li Huantian appeared, all the ancient martial ability users were very excited. They all bowed to him, which was also a kind of respect for the senior. Unfortunately, Li Huantian didn't pay any attention to the people under the city. His eyes were slightly closed. It seemed that even the collapse of the world could not disturb Li Huantian's state of mind at this moment. But if one looked carefully, they would find that the veins in Li Huantian's palm were bulging. Obviously, his heart was not as calm as he looked. Take a guess, who do you think will win? Needless to say, it must be Senior Huantian. He was the ninth master in the world 100 years ago. There is even a rumor that he has stepped into the primordial fifth stage. That's not necessarily true. I heard that in the annual meeting of the Wuan Bureau, Senior Huantian was suspected to be slightly inferior to Yi Xian. It's just a short fight. How can you tell the result? If Senior Huantian is really no match for Yi Xian, why would he issue a letter of challenge and fight with him in the Forbidden City today? All kinds of discussions were heard. Most people were not optimistic about Yi Xian. After all, the Absolute Sword Immortal had been famous for 100 years and was a legend in the ancient martial world. Although Yi Xian had become famous recently, how could he compare with Li Huantian? Chapter 89. While the crowd was discussing, a military car drove over from afar. As the car door was opened by Azure Dragon, Yi Xian's figure appeared in front of everyone. Yi Xian didn't walk across the sky like everyone had imagined, nor did he have a magnificent aura. Instead, he walked towards the Forbidden City like an ordinary person. Although Yi Xian didn't show any power, the crowd unconsciously made way for Yi Xian to walk alone. You're finally here. On top of the Forbidden City. Li Huantian opened his eyes, and a sharp sword qi burst out from his body. The flying snow sword in his hand buzzed, and he raised his essence, qi, and spirit to the extreme. He looked at Yi Xian with a burning gaze. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't respond at all. He walked slowly until he stepped into the void and reached the top of the city, as if Li Huantian didn't exist. Yi Xian's attitude angered Li Huantian, and the crowd looked at him in surprise. They couldn't understand why Yi Xian was so casual in front of Li Huantian, a master of Xiantian Stage 5. Could it be that this Mr. Yi did not know that perhaps after this battle, he would become a cold corpse? Yi Xian didn't know what the crowd was thinking, and even if he knew, he wouldn't care at all. In fact, in Yi Xian's eyes, Li Huantian was just a joke. He could kill this person with a pinch of his fingers, so why would he care about him? Li Huantian was a cultivator at the Crossing Calamity stage. Although this world was at the end of the Dharma ending age, and the spiritual qi of heaven and earth didn't exist in the world, and Yi Xian couldn't use the skills of a cultivator, why would he care about a nobody at the stage 5 of qi cultivation? At this moment, Yi Xian looked over and didn't see Nangong Tian's figure. This caused him to frown slightly. A bad feeling arose in his heart, and a pondering expression flashed through his eyes. Junior, you're too arrogant. Li Huantian could completely feel that Yi Xian didn't place him in his eyes. This caused him to roar in anger as his eyes turned scarlet red. Yi Xian snapped out of his thoughts and looked at Li Huantian for the first time. His voice was gloomy as he said, "Old man, you know you're no match for me, yet you still want to court death. Do you really think I won't kill you?" Whoosh! When the crowd heard this, it immediately caused a huge uproar. They focused their attention on Li Huantian, and a look of surprise flashed across their eyes. Could it be that the rumors are true? Is Senior Heaven Summoner really no match for Yi Xian? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Li Huantian's face turned red and his hand that was holding the flying snow sword trembled uncontrollably. Junior, you've gone too far. Li Huantian roared crazily. His face was flushed and his Xiantian Gang Qi was violently buzzing around his body. His Xiantian 5th stage cultivation was strangely rising and a misty 5-colored light was condensing above his head. 5 Qis unification. Could this be the legendary 5 Qis unification stage? Tian Yu, who was below the city, shouted in a trembling voice. His eyes were filled with excitement. Master Tian Yu, what's 5 Qis unification? A warrior asked in surprise. At this time, Tian Yu was trembling incessantly as he explained the 5 Qis unification realm to the people around him. Everyone's face gradually turned pale and they looked at Li Huantian with awe. What was 5 Qis unification? The Xiantian 9th stage was divided into 3 major realms. The first 3 realms were for ordinary Xiantian warriors, which was Tian Yu's realm, but he was just a beginner. The 4th to 6th realms were called 3 flowers at one's prominence. Xiantian warriors had already reached a higher level and could float in the air and use flying swords to kill people. The last 3 realms were called 5 Qis unification. When a Xiantian warrior stepped into the 7th realm, a 5-colored light would condense above his head and his cultivation would improve qualitatively. It was an exaggeration to say that he could take a person's head from 1,000 miles away, but it was true that he could kill people with his mind. There was also a legend that when one stepped into the 5 Qis unification realm, he had already peeped into the legendary Earth Immortal realm. Rumble. Waves of qi rolled and the void exploded. Li Huantian stepped into the void, his innate gang qi rolling in all directions. The flying snow sword buzzed, and sword qi filled the sky around him. His unparalleled power was overwhelming. Junior, if you kneel and kowtow to this old man and beg for forgiveness, this old man might still spare your life today. Li Huantian's majesty was awe-inspiring and gave people a feeling of inviolability. He looked down at Yi Xian from the void and his voice echoed in the air. Looking at Li Huantian in the void, Yi Xian smiled. He really smiled, but it was a contemptuous smile. It was as if he had found a clown who kept acting coquettishly in front of him, but could not arouse his interest at all. Burning your blood essence and fighting to the death. You're not bad. Yi Xian nodded slowly. Come, let me see what you can do after your cultivation has improved. Yi Xian put his hands behind his back and said calmly. Go to hell. Faced with Yi Xian's provocation, Li Huantian went completely crazy. He violently unsheathed his flying snow sword and slashed through the sky with a sword light of more than 10 feet. The dazzling sword light seemed to tear the darkness apart and directly slashed at Yi Xian. Rumble. The void exploded and the sword qi buzzed. When Li Huantian displayed this invincible sword attack, the people below the city retreated in horror, afraid that they would be implicated and suffer unimaginable injuries. Boom! Suddenly, Yi Xian moved. He took a step forward, and ripples appeared under his feet. He slapped the air with his palm and directly shattered Li Huantian's innate sword light. Then, he appeared in front of Li Huantian in an extremely strange manner. His sword was like the sky, capable of destroying everything. Yi Xian pointed out with both of his fingers, causing a ripple to appear in the air. Following a crisp sound, the flying snow sword in Li Huantian's hand transformed into a cold star that sprinkled down from the sky. Li Huantian was forced to continuously retreat with an incomparably lifeless expression on his face. The world was silent and everything was quiet. This scene happened in an instant, but it made Li Huantian and everyone else tremble uncontrollably. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it even if they were beaten to death. Buzz! Flickering light and passing shadow, moonlight steps. When Yi Xian appeared in front of Li Huantian again, his jade-like palm had already grabbed Li Huantian's neck and directly shattered his true Kang shield. Boring, really boring. You're really weak, aren't you? Li Huantian seemed to have turned into a chicken and was slowly lifted into the air by Yi Xian. No. Impossible. I burned my essence blood. Innate seventh stage. Why? Why? At this moment, Li Huantian no longer cared about life and death. His eyes were full of despair and confusion. He really could not understand why he was still not Yi Xian's opponent. He had cultivated for 100 years and burned all his essence blood at the end of his life. Chapter 90. Could you be? Suddenly, a thought flashed across Li Huantian's mind. He looked at Yi Xian abruptly. When he saw the indifference in Yi Xian's eyes, he felt as if his soul had left his body and his body was trembling uncontrollably. Tell me where Nangong Tian is and I'll leave your corpse intact, Yi Xian said calmly. Ha! Suddenly, Li Huantian laughed hysterically. As he laughed, a large amount of tears flowed out of his eyes. The legend is true. That legend is actually true. To think that I, Li Huantian, would be able to see it before I die. Before Li Huantian could finish his sentence, Yi Xian tightened his grip, making Li Huantian speechless. Obviously, Yi Xian understood that Li Huantian had seen through his identity as a cultivator. Tell me where Nangong Tian is, Yi Xian repeated. With Yi Xian choking his neck, Li Huantian spat out with great difficulty. With a voice that only the two of them could hear, he said, Yi Xian. You can't hold on. When the whole world knows your identity. You really have a lot of nonsense to say, Yi Xian said coldly. Crack. Under Yi Xian's terrifying strength, the sound of Li Huantian's throat breaking could be heard. Li Huantian's head tilted and his neck was broken by Yi Xian. Li Huantian's eyes were wide open before he died, proving that he died with a grievance. Bang! Yi Xian threw Li Huantian's body away as if it was a piece of trash. It even smashed a big hole in the ground. The crowd at the foot of the city wall was dead silent. They stared at Li Huantian's body for a long time without coming back to their senses. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. This strange atmosphere lasted for a full minute until an ancient warrior's legs gave way and he fell to the ground. All kinds of gasps could be heard from the crowd. Senior Huantian, is dead? Dead. He's dead. What? Several trembling voices could be heard. It was like a chain reaction. Countless ancient warriors with superpowers were muttering to themselves. When they looked up at Yi Xian, there was not only respect in their eyes, but also an indescribable fear. 100 years ago, he was the 9th most powerful man in the world and was known as the ultimate sword immortal. Today, he had even stepped into the 5 Qis unification. However, such a powerful existence had actually died so easily in Yi Xian's hands. How could this not cause everyone's hearts to shatter? All of a sudden, before everyone could recover from their horror, they saw a beam of light soar into the sky from the Forbidden City. It quickly turned into a void projection and appeared in front of everyone. On the projection, a man wearing a ghost mask was sitting in a pitch-black space. Who else could it be other than Nangong Tian, who was sitting beside him? Clap! 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 A round of applause could be heard from the projection. No one could see the expression of the man in the mask, but he said with a Xia accent, I passed by Mr. Yi in a hurry on the plane. I didn't expect to meet you again under such circumstances. Mr. Yi, you've made a name for yourself today. I'm deeply impressed. And Hal, cut the crap. Kill him. Nangong Tian's expression was vicious. He stared at Yi Xian through the projection as if he wanted to skin Yi Xian alive. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at the two people in the projection calmly. There was no change in his expression, and no one could tell what he was thinking. If I were you, I wouldn't be so stupid as to help Nangong Tian, Yi Xian said calmly. No. In the name of Satan, Mr. Yi, you're wrong. You're the stupid one, not me. The Nangong family has joined our organization, so of course, I have to protect the Nangong family. However, at this point, his voice paused for a moment and became extremely cold as he said, "Moreover, Mr. Yi, you're too arrogant. This world doesn't only have ancient martial arts. The technological weapons we have are existences that you can't imagine." Yi Zichen frowned and said, "Moreover, Mr. Yi, you're too arrogant. Yi Xian, you bastard. You killed my beloved daughter. I'll make sure you die without a burial place even if I have to give you all my assets." Nangong Tian roared crazily in the projection. "Mr. Yi, let me send you to meet Satan. You can enjoy this technological feast." After the man in the mask finished speaking, the projection in the air slowly disappeared. However, a blue light screen suddenly rose around the Forbidden City, trapping Yi Xian in the air. Sizzle. Hundreds of small drones rose from remote corners and surrounded Yi Xian in the air. Micro-ion cannon. HR-3 photon gun. Oh my god, is that the YR-1 liquid bomb? When these technological weapons appeared in front of everyone, they immediately screamed in horror. Then, they scattered like birds, afraid that the aftershock of these technological weapons would turn them into ashes. "Mr. Yi, run. These weapons are not something that can be stopped by humans." Azure Dragon's face was pale as he shouted at Yi Xian in the air. His eyes were filled with anxiety. As the leader of the Earth group, Azure Dragon was very familiar with these technological weapons even though he majored in ancient martial arts. No one knew how terrifying these weapons were better than him. Since ancient times, heroes used martial arts to break the law, and scholars used Confucianism to break the law. Why did the ancient martial arts families hide? Why did the Xia country set up the Martial Security Department? Why did the ancient martial artists with superpowers not dare to act recklessly even though they had superhuman powers? It was because of the deterrence brought by technological weapons. In the end, humans were made of flesh and blood. Who could resist technological weapons? It was not only the Xia country, but also the other countries in the world. If there were no technological weapons to intimidate these people with ancient martial arts abilities, the world would have long been in chaos. No matter how strong you are, can you withstand a nuclear bomb? Under that kind of terrifying power, everything would be turned into ashes. Therefore, in front of the colossus of the world, an individual's bravery would never be worth mentioning. From this, it could be seen how terrifying technological weapons were. However, Yi Xian was not an ancient martial artist. He was an immortal cultivator, and a cultivator at that. This was an unsolved mystery. "Azure Dragon, you can leave now." Under the waning moon, in the air, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the hundreds of drones around him. There was not the slightest bit of fear in his eyes as a bloody light spread out from his body. "Mr. Yi, if I leave, what will you do?" Azure Dragon asked anxiously. "Don't worry, they're underestimating me if they think they can kill me with such a childish weapon." Yi Xian sneered as a blood-red killing intent flashed across his eyes. Yi Xian was known as the Undying Heavenly Lord by the creatures in the Blood Sea battlefield. This title was definitely not just for show. He had experienced countless life and death tribulations, but he still managed to survive. The Undying Heavenly Sovereign, as the name implied, the word undying had an extremely profound meaning. Chapter 91. Yi Xian was calm and composed. That was the attitude that Yi Xian displayed. Azure Dragon had already left. However, he kept looking back at Yi Xian with worry in his eyes before he left. Boom! 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 The explosions in the night sky were deafening. There were miniature ion cannons, HR-3 photon guns, and even terrifying liquid bombs. When these technological weapons displayed their power, dazzling sparks exploded in the sky above the Forbidden City. The air was scorching, and the air was turbulent. Heaven and earth seemed to be shaking at this moment, and the citizens of Jindo City woke up from their sleep in fear, not knowing what had happened. At the same time, in a mysterious residence in Jindo City, the man with the ghost mask and Nangong Tian stared at the screen through the surveillance camera. Nangong Tian was extremely excited when they saw Yi Xian being engulfed by the sparks. "He's dead, this bastard is finally dead," Nangong Tian roared excitedly. "Oh, praise you, Satan. What a beautiful firework." The man with the ghost mask made a praying gesture as if he had turned into a devout believer. However, before the two of them could raise their glasses to celebrate, the sparks on the screen were slowly dissipating. A blurry figure appeared on the screen, and the two of them were stunned. Zoom in, zoom in. The man with the ghost mask was no longer calm. His eyes through the mask were filled with fear. Apart from the grimace man, Nangong Tian's face was also as pale as a sheet. He stared at the scene on the screen until the camera zoomed in, and a face that made him shudder appeared in front of him. How is this possible? In the image, Yi Xian was completely unharmed. He stood in the void and smiled at Nangong Tian and Nangong Tian through the screen. However, his smile was bone-chilling. "Oh, my God, how did he survive?" The man with the ghost mask trembled and roared. His confidence in winning collapsed completely, and he felt extremely uneasy. On the Forbidden City, Yi Xian's eyes were emotionless when he opened them. He stared at the drone in front of him. Through the pinhole camera, he seemed to have crossed the barrier of time and space and was staring at Nangong Tian and Yi Xian. "Nangong Tian, you can't run away." Yi Xian smiled cruelly and smashed the drone into smithereens before disappearing into the void. Although the two of them were separated from Yi Xian by a screen, their bodies tensed up and they trembled uncontrollably when they saw Yi Xian's cruel smile. They only recovered after dozens of breaths. "Brother Nangong, this Yi Xian is definitely not an ordinary ancient warrior. I'll send you out of China immediately to prevent any mishaps." The masked man quickly spoke as a hint of worry appeared in his eyes. No, I want to leave with my family." "Didn't you arrange for a helicopter to send us out of China tonight?" Nangong Tian asked with a trembling voice. Looking at Nangong Tian's pale face, the masked man said with a malicious look, "The Wu-An agency has been keeping an eye on the 8 big families in capital city and investigating the missile attack. We don't dare to act rashly. However, the Wu-An agency must be in chaos after tonight's attack. They don't have time to keep an eye on the Nangong family. I've already sent people to pick up your family, but you have to leave China now. Otherwise, if Yi Xian finds you, our whereabouts will be exposed to him." What Nangong Tian was most worried about was that something would happen to the Nangong family. With the guarantee of the grimace man, he started to pack up and prepare to leave China tonight. As for the enmity with Yi Xian, he could only take revenge in the future. At the same time, at the Nangong family, the lights were brightly lit and it was noisy. Several helicopters landed on the lawn and made loud noises. Nangong Tian's family was packing up and preparing to leave China. Buzz! The void vibrated and the air exploded. Before the Nangong family could board the helicopter, Yi Xian's figure suddenly appeared. His face was cruel and emotionless. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was a blood-red glow. Chi! He pointed his sword at the sky and the air exploded. Several beams of blood-red light shot out and cut the helicopter on the lawn into two. As Yi Xian waved his hand, several pilots were sucked in front of him. "Tell me, where is Nangong Tian?" Yi Xian said calmly. The pilots were already shocked by Yi Xian's methods. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Their voices trembled as they said, We don't know anything, we're just following orders to send the Nangong family out of China. What's the use of having you if you can't give me the answer I want?" Yi Xian squinted his eyes and smiled cruelly. He raised his sword and a few streams of blood splattered in the air. The pilots turned into headless corpses and fell to the ground. They couldn't be more dead. "Yi Xian, You have no respect for the law. How dare you kill people in the Nangong family? All of a sudden, a middle-aged man roared angrily. Behind him was a large number of people from the Nangong family. They looked at Yi Xian with fear. Ha, law. I am the law. What's your relationship with Nangong Tian? Yi Xian squinted his eyes and asked. Nangong Tian is my father. My name is Nangong Ming. Yi Xian, what do you want? Nangong Ming clenched his fists tightly. His gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with anger, but there was also an indescribable fear. Looking at Nangong Ming's angry face and the people from the Nangong family behind him, a creepy smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. I have a big question. In Nangong Tian's eyes, is his life more important or the lives of his family more important? It was like a devil's smile and a devil's whisper. When Yi Xian's words entered Nangong Ming's ears, he felt a chill down his spine. What do you want? I'm telling you, don't do anything rash, otherwise, my father won't let you go. Nangong Ming kept retreating and his face was extremely pale. Yi Xian slowly shook his head. His smile remained the same as ever as he said, No. You might have misunderstood. I just want to meet your father. It's just that the choice is in your father's hands. This is your son, right? Yi Xian's gaze was strange. He looked at a 7 or 8-year-old child behind Nangong Ming and directly walked towards him. Little friend, can you tell me who they are to you? Yi Xian smiled warmly as he caressed the child's hair bun. Although the child was young, he could tell that Yi Xian wasn't a good person. He pushed Yi Xian's hand away and hid behind Nangong Ming. He said, You bad guy, I'm not going to tell you. TSK. Yi Xian shook his head slowly and looked straight at Nangong Ming. He said, If you know your place, bring me your family's genealogy. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what will happen next. It was a blatant threat. Nangong Ming could tell from Yi Xian's expression that if he didn't follow Yi Xian's instructions, his son behind him would be killed. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.